Oh, looks like the internet went out for like a hot second. Apparently not really long enough to cut off the stream, so I'm just gonna hop back like a... I'm gonna hop back like a paragraph. Mariana, why don't you socialize with the other ladies over there? The General and I have some matters to discuss that would only bore a lady. Was that for like 15 seconds? Okay. I will leave the two of you to your conversation. She smiled brightly, sinking into a deep curtsy before making her way toward a group of women on the opposite side of the room. They giggled and fanned themselves as she grew nearer. Again, her urge to sigh was nearly insurmountable. The General's words, along with Bronson's reaction, only supported her working theory. Supporting the arts was only likely a front to the true intentions of the show she put on today. Otherwise, it would only make sense to invite other musicians and singers to take advantage of the magic and technology. Instead, they seem only concerned with the mechanics of it. Normally, she might discuss this theory with someone, even warn someone of her suspicions. However, she was truly isolated and alone. She wondered what she'd do with all the information, even if she found proof. After all, Estania's new king could very well support a military application. Would that even be so wrong? Did Estania not have a right to defend itself from other potential invaders? Since Estania's new king took power, most of their neighboring kingdoms seemed to destabilize nearly overnight. Rebellions sprang up. Saboteurs emerged from foreign kingdoms. No direct vomit from Estania, but the timing was just too suspicious. Many hours, when Mariana should have been sleeping, she read feverishly about the cultures and customs of these kingdoms. Bronson's study was near her room, and it was easy enough to convince her attendants that she only sought to support her future husband, and this education guaranteed she would always behave and speak properly in the presence of foreign diplomats. Many things did not add up, and Bronson's frequent mysterious travels, few of which were official business, made her uneasy. Lady Rhode, you are very kind to join us, one lady said. You light up the entire party. I wish I had those golden waves of hair, another added with a bit too much enthusiasm. And the voice of a goddess to match, a third said. Mariana waved her hand dismissively. I'm sorry, you must simply refer to me as Lady Cross for the time being, until after the wedding. I wouldn't want rumors circulating that might harm the reputation of Lord Rhode. Oh, I'm so sorry. It's just that with a future husband of high standing, not to mention handsome. The other women in the circle all started fanning themselves on that signal. I have been truly given abundance of good fortune. I have my late grandfather to thank for arranging my marriage prior to his death. He always put the rest of the family ahead of himself that way, she said, her smile ever warmer. She despised her grandfather. He put himself and his ambitions above everyone and everything. The cross women, and to a lesser extent the men, were mere pawns to be used. Even when staring death in the face, he could think of nothing other than advancing his own standing and elevating the family name. Yet her own father was nothing more than an open admirer of Bronson Road. At least her grandfather had backbone, even if he did only use it to press others to submit. I think Lord Road is just as lucky, a fourth woman blurted, penetrating the tight circle that had formed around her. After all, where else would he find a woman as beautiful and as talented in all of Estania? My daughter is pregnant. I fully intend to give the child singing lessons from a young age. Perhaps if you and Lord Road could have a child of your own soon, the two of them could. Mariana's sigh nearly burst from her chest, like a ferocious life form gnawing at the bars of a cage, unfit to hold it, and too small to comfort it. Without realizing it, she'd already inhaled deeply. Placing her hand on her chest, she let it out slowly and quietly. Ladies, if you would please excuse me. My performance earlier took a lot out of me, and I believe I could benefit from fresh air. Thank you all for your kind words. She bowed deeply but turned away before each of the women could return the bow. A small error, but an error still, one she immediately scolded herself for, thankful that Bronson Road wasn't watching her at that moment. She could get away with the occasional rude gesture since her standing was higher than the women she'd been speaking to. Still, she'd need to be more careful. No mistakes could happen from now on, not even small ones. She'd return later and blame her urgency on nausea and fatigue. On the balcony, the moon lit her surroundings brightly. No lamp lighting was necessary. Often, young couples could be found sneaking out on the balconies just like this one to steal a kiss away from the sight and whispers of the crowd. Others might use the same balcony strategically to make others believe that that's what's occurring. A girl alone was hardly a concern to anyone. She shook her head, finally allowing the sigh to escape her lips. A beautiful moonlight shone down upon her, begging to be admired, and all she could consider were the thoughts of others who might judge her behavior. The sight stirred a romantic company that Mariana rarely felt. Stealing a kiss beneath the moonlight didn't seem like such a terrible thing at the moment. Perhaps Sunday. No, such a thing would never happen to her. It was already too late for that. Sorry, I stopped for a second because Sunny hit a button. And apparently the internet went out again, because now like now it actually says I've only been on for like 6 minutes. So I don't even know like how long ago 6 minutes was. So anyway, that was the end of chapter 4. So I'm gonna take another sip. Sunny has returned also. So if I pause reading, it's probably to give him like the criminal side eye, because you know, he's always doing something. Aren't you, Sunny? Didn't go out again, just the timer reset from the last time, I think. Oh, okay. I guess that makes a little bit more sense. Ads running, okay. I'll just take like a 1-minute break. Scratch Sunny. Maybe he'll be a good boy if he just gets some pets in. You know how cats are. When they want their attention, they want their attention. Probably not. No, probably not. He does like the attention. And lets you know by like just messing with things that he wants attention. He's a very young cat. He's not a kitten anymore. He's like 2 years old now. 2 or 3. But he's still young at heart, he says. He's still very young at heart. He's staring at my hand because I'm touching his paw. He acts slightly offended when I'm poking his paw. Only slightly, though. Well, while we're at it, we'll just see how many chapters are in this book. Let's see. There are 15 chapters, plus an epilogue. So, technically, like, closer to 6. So, we're like 11 chapters away. Okay. Chapter 5. Lulu squirmed against Hansel's efforts to force her hair into some kind of shape that resembled presentable. Can you hold still? I'm not a mage, but this... Oh, no, never mind. I'm not a mage, but they may as well consider me one if I'm able to turn this into a presentable lady. Your office chair is uncomfortable. My rear is going numb. After arriving in Gastonia, Estonia's capital city, they'd wasted no time in readying to crash the party. Hansel had prepared. While she was asking questions and learning about the beautiful songstress, Hansel had already dressed and made himself presentable, acquired a dress that would fit her, and stuff it, along with everything else that he thought he might need, into a large suitcase. He predicted her every move flawlessly. That didn't change the fact his dimly lit office made for a very poor salon. If it's numb, then I see no reason to complain about it. It should also make it easier for you to hold still. Lulu grunted, crossing her arms. In all seriousness, you remember Estonia's social expectations for young ladies, don't you? It's imperative that you don't make a scene. I forged your identity in a way that discourages questions, but will quickly unravel if the right people ask them. Lulu tilted her head. Well enough to get by, I think. I'm far more familiar with Valencia's customs by now. Believe it or not, they have even larger sticks up their rears than that with that sort of thing. Luckily for me, I fit in well as a boy there. Convenient for the young women you flirted with, no doubt. Convincing enough, you might have hit on me yourself, Hansel. I make for the quite striking young man. Hansel laughed, pulling her hair roughly to straighten her head. I don't think a masculine version of you, difficult it is for me to believe you pulled that off, is really my type. I like more of a strapping appearance, more masculinity than I'm afraid you'd be able to muster. Unless you're telling me you can grow a beard. I'm wounded. Besides, you've clearly never been to Valencia. I don't think I saw a single thread of facial hair in all the years I was there. A boring place to be sure. At any rate, I'm nearly done. I am your betrothed, and you will speak very little. Avoid the other guests and see if you can accidentally stumble into a place you aren't supposed to be. Look for anything that can provide us with additional leads. Remember, you only have one specific reason for digging up dirt on Bronson Road. I have many. Don't assume your many are more important than my one. Wouldn't dream of it, Hansel mumbled while fitting her earrings. Your reason is also one of mine. After a minute of awkward silence, Hansel gave her a firm pat on the shoulder and handed her a small mirror. She stared at it for a moment and then turned to Hansel with a frown, handing the mirror back. What's wrong? Don't like it? He asked. No, just not used to seeing myself like this is all. Not in a long time. Then it's overdue. Beauty can be quite the useful tool, so you should learn to make use of it along with your many others. She nodded, rising to her feet. Let's go do that then. How are you going to avoid Bronson Road becoming suspicious of your snooping? Oh, that won't happen. I've arranged for a client of mine to make an appearance. Bronson won't want to stick around once he shows up. He'll likely leave altogether, giving us the opportunity we need to ask questions and do a bit of investigating. The only problem will be his loyal betrothed. We must make sure she doesn't retire early. I will do what I do best, and so I need you to make sure she remains distracted if you encounter her. Remember, subtlety. Say it with me, Lulu. Subtlety. I've been living as another person since I was 6 years old, Hansel. Only you know the real me. I'm pretty sure I can pull off elegant Estonian lady for one night. Are you ready then, partner? Hansel asked, offering his arm. As ready as I need to be, she replied. Arriving at the party, Hansel's silver tongue gained them entry with no hassle at all. It's almost as if he planned how he'd infiltrate this party long before tonight. Of course, that's because he had. She was the last-minute addition to the plan, and despite her jest, she intended to make herself useful. They introduced themselves to several other couples, taking the time to look natural and blend in with the other attendees. Hansel's extensive knowledge of all the noble wind mage families and their prominent figures made flattery a breeze. The easiest way to avoid a nobleman asking you prying questions is to never stop talking about him. Lulu politely smiled and nodded, squeezing his arm when it seemed appropriate. She made a quick study of the other women and mentally noted their mannerisms and behaviors. Layers of pointless complex rules served as a barrier to upper-class society, making it nearly impossible to fake. She'd have to be careful. Hansel offered her the excuse of being very shy, which she embraced, clinging to his arm and positioning herself slightly behind him. As they stepped away from a couple, Hansel leaned down and whispered into her ear, Do you think you'll be okay on your own for a while? I've spotted the stairs I suspect lead to a study. Should we be unable to reunite before the end of the party, meet my client and I at my office in 2 hours. Lulu nodded. She wasn't confident in the answer, but she'd inserted herself into this mess, and now he was counting on her. At the moment, no one was approaching her. Now was the perfect time to grab a drink from the table and plan, studying the various groups that were congregating and gossiping with one another. She took a glass of wine from the table and sipped, then felt a gentle touch on her arm that nearly made her jump out of her dress. I spent 3 years in Valencia as a young lady. It's a fascinating culture. She looked at the woman, too stunned to speak. Had someone recognized her? No, impossible. Even Hansel hadn't recognized her when she returned. Someone must have dug into her identity when they entered and found the holes. And unlikely. Too fast. That would take weeks or more. Lulu fought against the sweat forming under her arms, and her face burned. Should she make a run for it? And leave Hansel high and dry? Never. She had to play it off and regain her nerves somehow. She smiled, tilting her head. It's a curious place. My parents sent me there to study at the Royal Academy for 6 months. I attended many parties there and must have picked up on their mannerisms. What gave me away? The older lady smiled, pleased to see her observational skills acknowledged. It was the way you hold your glass, dear. Chest high and clawed from beneath the bowl. They looked down at her hand, then back to the woman. Such a small thing was all it took. What else has she failed to consider? You certainly have an eye for detail. I'm impressed, truly. No one seems to have noticed, but you did right away. The lady grinned from ear to ear, turning her head briefly as though trying to contain it. Was complimenting women rare here, too? The lady, I suppose if anyone should see it, it should be me, a teacher of etiquette to young ladies here in the capital. I've traveled to several other kingdoms, observing their cultures. Some men prefer to take their wives with them when they travel abroad, though there isn't much travel happening these days with all the ill will going around in the world. She frowned, then took a sip from her own glass. Lulu observed carefully. Index, middle finger, and thumb pressed against the stem. The other two fingers relaxed. She held the glass more to her side. She turned her head slightly when she took a sip. 2 quick sips, then returned the glass to her side again. Lulu mirrored the gesture, noting the woman's lack of reaction. Now was her chance to move on to less observant conversation partners. I should find my son. He's interested in traveling there soon and he would love to ask you questions. Perhaps you could discourage him from finding a wife there, as you and I both know how willful Valencian women are. Not good. Perhaps later. I'm afraid I need some air first. Lulu felt sick. How could she have messed this up so badly? It was so rare for Estonians to travel to Valencia, and she had to meet someone else who already had. She'd been so careful to blend in back there, but with all the rules, she'd made mistakes without realizing it. Oh, I'm sorry for pressing you, dear. I believe there's a balcony over there. Once you've collected yourself, perhaps you could consider speaking with my son? Lulu nodded, then stepped quickly toward the balcony. It was up several steps, elevated above the main floor, such that the attendees couldn't see it. Because of this, and in her haste, Lulu spilled onto it without a care in the world, completely unaware someone had already occupied it. The woman turned to Lulu, her mouth agape. No doubt she trampled all over some other precious Estonian custom just now. No wonder Hansel didn't want her to come. Their eyes met, and Lulu suddenly found herself unable to speak. This woman! Her eyes were like shimmering emeralds beneath the pale moonlight, and they were so big. Her hair, a gentle wave of gold. Her skin without a flaw to be seen, smooth and warm as the summer night. Even beneath the many layers of her cumbersome dress, Lulu could observe a womanly figure that, for a moment, encouraged her to fill in the blanks as she desired to inspect it more closely. Only she had to be on her best behavior. She'd made enough of a scene already. She took a deep breath and gathered herself, speaking to the woman who was still watching her in silence. You see... Another breath. Come on, Lulu. You can do this. Apologies for my intrusion. I should have peered through the door before invading your space. Please excuse me. As she turned, the woman placed her hand on the balcony's rail, gently tapping it. You may join me. Lulu took a step forward, tripping on her dress and nearly spilling her wine. Now she was on one knee. Her face was probably red as a tomato. She felt the urge to cry, which surprised her. A hand appeared in front of her, accompanied by a smile that was free of judgment. She took it, rising to her feet and standing alongside the woman, peering out into the moonlight night. Could she be? It's the end of chapter 5. I get a drink. Sunny is currently resting, although he is taking up the whole desk as usual because he's 14 pounds of fluffy fat cat. He likes to say he's not fat, he's just got a lot of fluff. And he does indeed have a lot of fluff. He's gained 3 pounds in the past year. Of course, he wasn't fully grown when we got him, so... Alright. Continuing onward. Chapter 6. Mariana helped the woman steady on her feet, and the two walked to the end of the balcony. Something about the way she looked was so alluring to Mariana, in a way she hadn't seen before. On close inspection, she could see that the woman's look had been thrown together in what was probably less than an hour, though likely by expert hands. Her brown hair was soft and healthy in appearance, making it clear she rarely did anything extreme with it. You can let go of my hand now, the girl said with a mischievous grin. Or don't. I don't mind, she added. Mariana quickly dropped her hand without looking in her direction, taken aback by her brazen words. This girl made her feel uneasy after looking into her blue eyes and taking her hand. Something about her smile did it, or was it her forwardness? Another of Bronson's tricks, no doubt. This must have been why he left her alone. Another test she was meant to pass or fail. She immediately became cold, raising her guard as she always did, considering a test of her own. I'm I'm Mariana Cross, betrothed of the Lord Bronson Road. I've met all the ladies in the most prominent houses, but your face is unfamiliar to me. Lulu Featherweather. Lulu Fairyweather, at your service, my lady, she said, with a slight bow. Fairyweather, was it? That would explain why we've never met. The Fairyweather family fell out of favor years ago because their drought of wind-mage offspring. It pained Mariana to speak to the girl this way, partly because it always did, and yet something about this Lulu Fairyweather intrigued her and made her feel a rise inside her chest that was as unfamiliar as her name. She knew she should make the girl leave. Being close to her would only bring them both trouble, and yet she wanted her to stay. She wanted to hope that someone real and genuine could exist in this world and not simply be a fictional character created by Bronson to make her more jaded. But hey, it's still got enough pull to get me into these swanky parties. Besides, no one bothers with the smelly Fairyweather girls. I'm as single as that moon in the sky, Lulu said, pointing up. Mariana had expected indignation. She had expected the girl to stamp her feet and storm off the balcony at the insult to her family name. Again, she felt disarmed. I don't think you're smelly. Besides, do you not consider the fact that you aren't used as a bargaining piece for family gain to be a blessing rather than a curse? Do you like the way I smell? She said, smiling, shifting ever so slightly closer to her. The girl was so strange. It was unnerving and part infuriating, but also exciting. I don't see why that should be the focus of my statement. Besides, I only meant to say that you aren't smelly. Do you not take offense to my words about your family's honor? Lulu snapped her fingers and smiled, then looked away, ahead, saying nothing. Mariana's emotions were only becoming more confused, as she could feel this girl wriggling further and further beneath her skin. Was that crude gesture, and what do you mean by it? Mariana demanded. Lulu tilted her head, her mouth falling open slightly. You mean snapping my fingers? Whatever you call it. Do you mean to insult me by doing it? Lulu laughed much harder than warranted, before finally taking in a breath to collect herself. Mariana's face was flushed with irritation. This girl used some kind of insulting gesture, and then had the audacity to laugh at her face? She was just a Fairyweather girl, yet she'd been so inappropriately bold in this conversation. She wasn't sure if she wanted to slap her or something else. You mean snapping my fingers? Wow, you really are sheltered. I think it's cute. Want me to show you how? Sheltered? How dare! Before she could finish her statement, Lulu had snatched her hand from the balcony rail and held it in hers. You put your middle finger and thumb together. Like this, she said, using both hands to move her fingers into place. This girl was so brutish, bold, and forward. To snatch up a lady's hand this way. Not even the most crass Estonian general would dare be so rude to do such a thing. Mariana's body felt almost numb from the sudden wave that washed over her. The feeling was so foreign that she couldn't even identify it. I failed to see how placing my finger and thumb together could... Relax. There's a little more to it. Watch closely. Lulu demonstrated it several more times. Mariana attempted it, with lousy results. You're playing some kind of prank on me. Lulu grabbed her hand again, but more gently this time. The two looked at each other, saying nothing for several seconds. It's the last part of the movement that makes the sound. Pressing your middle finger to your thumb just lets you build momentum for the release. It's the middle finger slapping into the palm that makes the snapping sound. Oh, and the gesture really doesn't mean much. I just meant it as a sort of aha, is all. Aha? What do you mean? She asked, attempting the gesture several more times. Still failing, but making enough of a sound on one attempt that she just now accepted it wasn't being tricked. It would just take more practice. The way you asked me if I took offense to the words you said about my family name, you were hoping I'd be upset and leave, although you clearly enjoy my company. You also mentioned my inferior status as a blessing, because I wouldn't be used as a tool to benefit my family through marriage. That confirmed a theory of mine, so I snapped my fingers. Aha! Mariana's head felt light. Knots formed in her stomach. This was dangerous. This girl was dangerous. She would tell Bronson and her cover as the dutiful and devoted wife-to-be would be damaged. He'd never loosen her leash again. She needed to calculate her reaction, something to test the girl. You know Lord Road, then? Mariana asked without hesitation. You could say Bronson Road and I go way back. You knew my father. You could say the man has made a big impact on my life. You can say a lot of things, really. Actually, no. I'll say what I really mean. What do you even see in a man like that? I despise the man, Mariana blurted before covering her mouth with both hands. There, that should do it. Let's see how she reacts. After being so careful up to this point, she'd finally snapped and made a mistake. She'd let this girl get too close to her and provoke her. It was a battle between the two of them, a battle of wit and words, and one she might lose. Tell me what you want. What is your price? You mustn't tell Bronson of our conversation. I'm begging you. She clasped Lulu's hands in hers. Now that it had come to this, she would only be reduced to begging and pleading. Her only remaining option was to somehow convince this woman not to reveal everything to Bronson or spin the situation to her advantage. Now that he'd returned with those scars, she suspected more than ever that his adventures abroad were far more than what he claimed them to be. The unrest in Valencia and Belmar, their previously peaceful neighbors, and the conflicts that had emerged with the neighbors of these countries. She couldn't prove it, but her intuition was that Bronson's hands were everywhere, stirring these conflicts while he claimed to be doing his best to reduce them. Everyone who tried to go after Bronson Road ended up missing or dead. He was ruthless. It would take a long time and much patience to get past his defenses, and she was the only one in a position to do it. Estania's future very may well depend on her. A kiss might be enough to convince me, Lulu said with a smile, tapping her cheek. Without another word, Mariana gripped both of her shoulders and pulled her close, leaning in and pressing their lips together. Lulu shoved her away, a look of horror on her face. She touched her lips with her hand and looked at Mariana, who was already turned slightly away, facing the end of the balcony. Lulu started, but stopped when she saw the tears in Mariana's eyes. Was that enough? If you want more, I will give it. Everything if you want it, she whispered, her words tired, changed in anger and desperation. And resentment, now to gauge her reaction. Lulu's own eyes were filled with tears now as she grabbed Mariana's arm and attempted to turn her. I'm so stupid. It was a stupid joke. I'm sorry. I didn't mean... The door flung open, startling Lulu. Mariana didn't even turn to see who it was and kept her eyes ahead. Time to go, Hansel said, his voice quick and quiet. He looked between the two women for a moment. It seemed he wanted to say something to them. Instead, he insisted. Now! I'm not who you think I am, Mary. I'd never work for a man like that. I hate... She really meant it. It was too late to engage in a genuine conversation with her, but she could see now that she'd meant everything she said. But if that was the case, her test was too cruel. Lulu, Hansel said, raising his voice and nodding toward the door. Just look at me, Lulu said, trying again to turn Mariana to face her, to no avail. Hansel grabbed her arm, yanking her violently away. Whatever this is has to wait. Sorry we disturbed you, Lady Cross. Good night. They hurried through the main area, earning them several suspicious glances. Hansel, this better be... Oh, it is, he said, producing a notebook from his coat as they turned the corner just out of sight of the guards posted out front. It very much is. That's the end of chapter 6. My nose itches so bad. I think it's because Sunny's hair must have got on my nose. And it tickles. And for some reason, for hours after getting it off my nose, especially if it's a huge clump, it'll still feel like it's there. Alright. Moving right along after this chapter, when we get to chapter 8, I'll take a short break. Or so, maybe. We're about halfway through the book now. Chapter 7. Lulu changed, then joined Hansel in his office. She sat down hard in the chair across from his desk and crossed her arms, avoiding eye contact with him. I see you're upset, but what in the world were you doing? I thought you were supposed to be learning about the future Lady Road, not trying to get her dress off. Lulu shot him a glare. I wasn't trying to get her dress off, and I learned a surprising number of things about her in our brief conversation. That she's scared to death of Bronson Road and that she's just being used by him, or so she says. I could have guessed as much. Almost everyone close to him is there because they admire or fear him. She was bound to be in one of those two camps. At least now we may know which. Lulu shook her head. finally feeling herself calm a bit. There's a third camp. Our camp. She isn't afraid of him. Rather, she isn't just afraid of him. She despises him. Those were her own words. She was only afraid that I would tell him she said as much. She almost added the rest of the story about how she'd try to lighten the mood by joking about a kiss and how hard it had backfired. She felt horrible still and wasn't in the mood to be teased about it by Hansel. Just as he'd open his mouth, a knock came at the door. 4 quick knocks, then 2 slow ones with 3 seconds in between. Aha! My client I told you about, he said, rising to his feet with the excitement of a child. Wait, what if someone got to him and he knows the knock? Lulu said, grabbing his sleeve. Hansel laughed, yanking away from him. When you meet him, you'll see why I laughed. He opened the door and a large man stepped inside. A very large man, nearly as broad as 2, with a weighty sword on his hip. A smaller person would need 2 hands to wield it. Did you find anything? The man asked, sitting down in the chair next to Lulu's. Hold on, I'll just show you, Hansel said, rubbing his hands together with a grin. He pulled back his hood, revealing a thick beard that covered what looked like a weathered but handsome face. She expected a man like this to be rude and overlook her, but he immediately disproved her assumptions. I'm Blaine Grave. I understand you have your own reasons for going after Bronson Road, but thank you for helping Hansel and I. Oh, that. Wait, did you say Blaine Grave? Blaine smiled, clearly getting used to this kind of reaction. Unfortunately, Hansel said it would be a waste of effort giving me a cover identity unless I would give up my sword, since some may know me by that alone. I'm not willing to do that. We used my identity to our advantage. And it worked like a charm, Hansel said, pulling the folder from his desk and flipping through the various letters inside. Bronson left the party when word spread about your arrival. You two have history? Lulu asked. Do you mean Hansel and I, or with Bronson? Actually, both, Lulu said, looking back and forth between the two. Not the history you're thinking, Lulu, Hansel said without looking up, a hint of a smile on his lips. I met Blaine in Velmar, and I joined him on his journey here after learning his story. I knew I'd miss my chance there anyway, and I knew Blaine and I could be a big help to one another. Chance at what? Lulu asked, tilting her head. Seeing Bronson in action, Blaine said. Bronson and I might have a brief history or a long one, I'm not sure. Hansel may figure all that out. Not exactly, Hansel said, sliding a letter toward Blaine. Mind the candle, these are quite valuable. Blaine skimmed over it, pausing once in a while to look up at Lulu and Hansel, nodding. After a long silence, he finally spoke up. I'm confused, he said, rubbing his chin. What's there to be confused about? It's a clear connection to General Hardin's actions in Velmar. The two communicated. This letter requested his presence. You know better than anyone what that happens from there. Lulu's eyes were wide with surprise. I heard about that. Moira's top general went rogue and tried to stay in Velmar to continue their invasion, even after his king recalled the troops and agreed to end the war. That's the short version, Blaine said, confirming her impression of the events. But not what I'm confused about. Well, don't keep us in suspense, Hansel said, finally taking a break from the letters to give his full attention to Blaine. Why were these in his study? Oh, thank you for joining, Marlejito. Or is it Marlejito? Either way, thanks for joining. Hansel shook his head. Just as they tie him to the events, they tie others to the events as well. Perhaps he wanted to keep these to assert his influence of the other person in the conversation. Blackmail can be quite powerful. In fact, seeing some of these other letters, he's clearly doing just that. Okay, sure, but why aren't they better hidden? That they were accessible by someone in just a few minutes at the party doesn't seem right to me, Blaine said. They weren't easy to find. I suppose I just made it look easy. There was a hidden key that unlocked a hidden lock on a hidden drawer. Not exactly sitting out in the open to be happened upon by a curious passerby. Blaine grunted, studying the letter in front of him again. Still not convinced? Hansel asked, shrugging his shoulders. I say you're looking a gift horse in the mouth. This is plenty of evidence to pass on to the king and potentially have Bronson Road dealt with swiftly. And what if the king approves of his actions? Worse yet, what if Bronson was just following orders? Blaine asked with a bluntness that seemed to catch Hansel off guard. Hansel sat quietly looking through the other letters, acting as though he hadn't heard the question. It's a fair question, Lulu said. I say we deal with Bronson directly, use his own methods. My father died in an airship accident, knocked unconscious, and fell overboard. If it was good enough for him, it's good enough for Bronson Road. Too good for him. Hansel sighed, finally looking up from the letters. You and Blaine are asking the same questions for two different reasons. What happened to your father was unfortunate, but... Lulu stood and stomped her foot, clenching her fist at her side. Unfortunate? Unfortunate? I'm not sure that's what I'd call it, Hansel. Murder might be more appropriate. Why take any chances? Lulu, you know that's not what I meant. Your father's murder sits high on the list of Bronson Road's crimes. You need to understand that while it's at the top of your list, he's done far worse. If he's destabilizing neighbors' countries internally, perhaps even their neighbors by proxy, conflicts have emerged that have cost thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of lives. You think he'll stop there? That's the issue, and we all understand it, Blaine said, still perfectly calm despite the raised voices around him. The question is, what's next? You take the evidence to the king, assuming you can make it to him without someone stopping you first, and he's horrified to learn what Bronson Road has done. He immediately orders his execution. Alright, second scenario. He knows about everything already. Bronson is simply following his instructions and acting on his behalf. A lot can happen from there. He might sacrifice Bronson as a scapegoat anyway, or he'll be forced to ensure your silence by some means. Violence tends to be the preferred one for monarchs. Hansel grinned, making eye contact with Blaine. Is there a hint of concern I detect in your voice? You're worried about me, aren't you? Blaine didn't take the bait. Of course I'm worried about you. Don't try to lighten the mood with your jabs. This is a serious matter, and I won't let it go. Neither will the young lady here. Lulu nodded in agreement. He's right. It's too dangerous, and we risk Bronson getting off without so much as a slap on the wrist. You're worried about that girl too now, aren't you? Hansel asked. Lulu nodded again. Yeah, as a matter of fact, I am. I don't like it. Not one bit. She's a songbird in his cage, and I'm not going to put up with it. But that's a different topic, and I will not let you derail this conversation. Neither is Blaine. You're talking about a suicide mission. Blaine nodded in agreement. That's exactly what it is. Hansel sighed, slapping his hands down on the stack of letters. Oh, but that's where you're wrong. After all, I'm not one to volunteer my own life for heroics. There are recent letters here with officials in 2 other kingdoms. Even if the king of Estonia is aware what's going on, what of Valencia's queen and the mayor of Arthurus? Estonia has very little military capability. With the witch in Arthurus, they wouldn't dare attack it anyway. Valencia is very vulnerable right now. It's the perfect time to meddle and go unnoticed, Lulu said. Hansel pointed at Lulu, smiling. And that's why, if anything happens to me, these letters need to find their way to the appropriate parties in Arthurus and Valencia. The king will make me made aware of these letters exist, and that they will be made known if the resolution here isn't satisfactory. That should help persuade him, regardless of his initial position on the matter. I don't believe Bronson Road will be that important to him. He'll be happy to throw him to the wolves to save himself. If that's how things go down, though, this will present a new set of problems. You'll have to escape and go into hiding, probably across the border, Blaine said. If you could pull it off, that is. It's not quite a suicide mission, but it's still extremely dangerous. Hansel shrugged. There's no safe way to go after a man like Bronson Road. Never has been. You know that just as well as anyone. Better, in fact. I wish I'd killed him when I had the chance, Blaine said with a sigh, instinctively placing his hand on the hilt of a sword. Lulu eyed him up and down. Are you saying you're some kind of mage? Blaine here is a bit of a scholar, despite his looks. He's seen more magic firsthand than just about anyone else. And so much left to see, I've barely scratched the surface. Yet, I've seen an expert warrior handle him with ease. In fact, that's why he fled. No offense, Blaine, but who is this amazing warrior, and why didn't you bring him here with you? Her, Blaine corrected. Oh, a woman? Lulu asked, her interest piqued. Yes, the best swords master I've ever encountered. She's retired, married. Lucky man, Lulu said, nodding. Woman, Blaine corrected again. What? Blaine only laughed. What's so funny, Master Blaine? Lulu said, wondering if she was being teased. You don't approve? Despite Blaine's appearance, he's a very open-minded man, experienced and well-traveled. I've learned a lot from our brief friendship. He wouldn't tease you about something like this. I think he's just guessed your preference based on your reaction to the story. Lulu looked at Blaine, waiting for confirmation of Hansel's theory. Blaine just nodded before returning to Hansel. What do you mean, despite my appearance? Listen to us. We've known or been reunited with one another recently. We sound like a trio of old friends. Can I count on the two of you to see the plan through? I'm trusting you with my life, after all. Lulu nodded, looking to Blaine. Blaine nodded as well. Tomorrow morning I'll depart. Soon this could be all over, and we'll have a drink to celebrate. Alright, that's the end of chapter 7. We're about to begin chapter 8. We are officially halfway through the book. So I'm going to go ahead and pause here and take about a 10-minute break. Use the dragon's potty and everything else. Go to the little dragon restroom. Get some water, and then we'll start with chapter 8. See you guys in just a second. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in and exchanged for smelly, dirty, paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting Dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in and exchanged for smelly, dirty, paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting Dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933,
President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in and exchanged for smelly, dirty paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting Dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 1933, President Roosevelt ordered all gold over a small value be turned in and exchanged for smelly, dirty paper human money. On June 5th, 1933, the United States officially went off the gold standard. Do you know what happens when a dragon's breath touches paper money? Dragons have had to resort to desperate measures, assuming human-like forms, depositing this paper money into human banks, and working jobs. Gone are the days you could burn down a castle and take its treasure. Many dragons are working on rebuilding their stocks of gold, but the exchange rate from feeble green paper to beautiful golden metal is very challenging. Please consider supporting Dragon streamers with a donation, Twitch subscription, or art commission. Your donations will go toward gold bars and coins, which will eventually allow your dragon to sleep on a bed of gold again. It's the only way for a dragon to get a proper rest. Please call the 1-800 number below on your screen to make a donation today. Thank you for your kindness, generosity, and compassion. Are you, or a dragon you know, suffering from an understocked gold hoard? On April 5th, 19... President Roosevelt
And we're back. Let me start up my music again. Alright, we're on chapter 8 now. After seeing off the last of the guests with a bright smile, Mariana greeted Bronson on his return a few minutes later. "Is everything all right?" she asked, knowing he'd never willing confide in her. "Nothing you need to concern yourself with, my dear. Thank you for entertaining all our guests while I was stepped out away on urgent business, but you must be exhausted. You should get some rest. In fact, I think you're overdue for a holiday. You've been pushing yourself so hard lately, leading up to the experiment." If any of his concern was genuine, Bronson might be considered a decent man. However, she learned long ago that precisely when he wanted her out of the way was precisely when she needed to be most aware. suggesting this holiday meant something big must be coming. She had a feeling he wouldn't be joining her. It would be nice to lounge around in a few days in comfortable clothes. It would give me a chance to write songs, which I haven't done in ages. Only, I don't feel so comfortable being so informal in front of our servants. Say no more. I'll send them away for a few days. Would you like to keep the chef at least? Mariana grinned. I think I'd like to fend for myself the entire time. It would be like a small adventure. Bronson nodded. Very well, but I must keep security posted at the entrance. Your usual guards. Will you be joining me? Surely you need a rest as well. You've only recently returned home. He shook his head. Sometime soon. I have a date for our wedding, 3 months from now. I will set aside some time to spend with you then. That's wonderful, she said, beaming. I'm overjoyed. So am I. Good night, he said, gesturing toward the stairs. Seems this was the limit of how much he would tolerate their conversation. She bowed obediently and went straight to her room. Careful to behave naturally, she changed and went to bed, closing her eyes. If she was right, it wouldn't be long until confirmation came. She truly was tired and had to fight hard against falling asleep. Just as she expected, not 20 minutes later, she felt it. Not a movement of footsteps on her floor, or the sound of feet falling. It was the gentle wind across her face, slight but noticeable when paying attention. A wind mage like Bronson could take stealth to a different level. Wind magic could even alter the sound of surrounding the mage. It was the foundation principle behind the experiment she'd taken part in. Wind magic carried her voice across massive territory, but also amplified it so the volume wasn't reduced elsewhere, all without amplifying other sounds. Once, she'd even been asked to sing alongside someone else, and the mages were able to effectively silence one and amplify the other without being noticed. The only thing that always gave them away was the disturbance of the surrounding air. The room was small, so the air was still. If she concentrated, she could always tell. After a moment of lingering, she knew he'd left. Once it satisfied him, she was asleep. It was her turn now. She counted down in her head, allowing about 5 minutes to pass before she opened her eyes and crept out of her bed. She'd have given almost anything to be a wind mage herself, but female wind mages were so rare that there was only one born for every 1 or 200 males. There were currently only 2 in the kingdom. One was so old she might just die any day now, and the other was just a child. Mariana pitied them both. As much as surprised her marriage was treated by her own family, the female wind mage was destined to be a power piece, equally worshipped and controlled. She frequently had to remind herself that wishing things wasn't enough to make them real. Though she had no wind magic, she was very light on her feet. Tiptoeing out of her room into the vacant room opposite, she easily cracked the window in a way that allowed her to hear the conversation below. A convenient tree branch obscured the view, a drawback in that she couldn't see who was speaking, but an even bigger advantage in that those below could not see the window. As calmly as carefully as she could, she cracked it. So, what do you plan to do about it? An unfamiliar male voice asked, hushed but clearly distraught, judging by the urgency. Nothing, Bronson replied. The king will take care of it for me. I'm not sure the king will appreciate, the man said, his shaking tone revealing his timidity. I don't care what he appreciates. He wouldn't be sitting on that throne if it weren't for me. He could be replaced just as easily as the last king. She listened in on many of these conversations, but she never heard something so close to an admission of guilt. Even if he did outright admit to killing the last king himself, who would punish him? Who would believe her? However, if there's one lesson that her grandfather taught her that she took to heart, it's that opportunities rarely present themselves to the impatient. The more she learned, the better equipped she would be to recognize and seize such an opportunity. If she couldn't do anything about him, then perhaps someone else could. Politics and the whims of the court could change in an instant. Of course, I didn't mean to imply. The fact that you're implying anything rather than listening carefully to my instruction means you are overstepping. Someone will appear with evidence that links me to various communications abroad. I want this person immediately imprisoned and secretly executed. We cannot take any chances with them, as I suspect they have been investigating me for some time. We report that they are being held in a dungeon awaiting trial for fabricating evidence to frame an official. How will he explain the fact that they are already dead when the trial arrives? Bronson chuckled. He took his own life to avoid the shame, of course. So you used fabricated evidence to trap this individual? I doubt only a single individual is involved. That's why we will seal the borders for 1 week to investigate a potential contamination of imported food. We will use this time to track down their associates. Either they will attempt to rescue him or flee. Either way, we will outmaneuver them. As for the evidence, of course it's real. They might suspect the trap if it wasn't. Are you sure you're betrothed? The man's voice cracked again. She is the closest in proximity to you. What if the girl... Bronson chuckled again. None of this worried him in the least. Mariana? That girl is the feminine ideal. Beautiful, submissive, and as dumb as a pile of stones. Naturally, if she suspects nothing. But what could she honestly do even if she did? She doesn't even realize the nature of the experiments she's been taking part in. She thinks we're just doing this to spread her songs to the masses. No. Of every possibility, Mariana concerns me the least. Mariana clutched her chest, feeling a deep sting from the sudden realization. Not about Bronson's impression of her. No, that was her doing. She wanted him to think of her that way. The sting came from him partially being correct. How could she have been so stupid? She should have realized the true nature of these experiments long before now. Forgive me, I'm overly cautious. We will do as you ask, informing our guards at the border to look for suspicious individuals attempting to flee. Attendants at the palace will screen every visitor's reason for asking the audience and will instruct the guards to arrest the individual when they present themselves. You are as thorough as always, Lord Rode. I would not have survived the song otherwise, Calvin. You're dismissed. Calvin. It surprised her that Bronson was even willing to speak a name aloud in case they were being listened to. Is he getting sloppy? Or could this be a fake name leaked to trick anyone into listening and exposing themselves? She'd disregard the name, as it was far from what was important. After all, she knew something that Bronson didn't. She knew the identity of the mysterious individual who had found the evidence, and at least one accomplice. Oh, and the airship is in order and ready to depart Earthris in 3 days. Years of planning are about to come to fruition. I must really congratulate you, Lord Rode. You are dismissed, Bronson repeated. For once, she had an advantage. More than one, in fact, and an opportunity to seize. That this airship expedition hadn't been announced could have meant a few things, but all possibilities led to somewhere terrible. Bronson would have her killed, or worse, if he found out she got in his way. Her family would disown her. She would be a caged bird for the rest of her life. Yet if she did nothing, what would happen to Arthurus? Could she leave that man she met on the balcony to die? That girl, could she leave her to die? The time for patience and waiting was over. It was the time to act. She'd be the person she wanted to be, true to herself, even if it cost her everything. That's the end of chapter 8. Now we're on chapter 9, so let me get a sippy sip of my water. Changing voices actually does take a bit of toll on your voice. But it's not too bad because my voice is used to this, so. Hello, Lily. Lily came in here to say hello. Hello, Lily. Usually she goes straight to her bed in the corner, but she decided to stop and look at me today. She was like, hi, Mom. Alright, chapter 9. A blend of excitement and fear kept Mariana far from sleep. As time passed, she felt herself losing her nerve. So many thoughts went through her mind. What if she was just another trap laid by Bronson? What if she's caught? She clutched her bedsheet tightly, pulling it over her head as she anticipated the thin rays of light that would soon begin weakly flooding in through her window. She wasn't even remotely tired when she heard the front door closing and resisted the urge to hop to her feet. As naturally as she would any other day, she stepped out of bed and quickly dressed. She needed to move quickly to increase her odds of catching the stranger before he fell into the trap, but she couldn't raise any suspicions. After brushing her hair, she took only a moment to appreciate how much better she liked it this way. She was relieved Carrie and Nellie weren't here, or getting dressed for the day would take hours. She was thankful Bronson hadn't sent them here to monitor her. Thankfully, he didn't. Whatever the reason, Mariana was just glad of it. She approached the door in a simple red dress, opening it and stepping out to greet the 2 guards in front. Day was breaking and they just changed shifts. You're up early, Lady Cross, one of the young men said, smiling. "And looking lovely as always. I almost didn't recognize you dressed this casually," the other said. She recognized both men as regulars, but they were some of the more kind and respectful of Bronson's potential picks. She only hoped that she wouldn't get them into too much trouble. "Thank you. Has Lord Rowan already departed? I got up early to surprise him at breakfast, but it seems he's nowhere to be found," Mariana said, doing her best to look disappointed. "Sorry to hear that, my lady, but you're correct that he's already departed." Mariana sighed, shrugging her shoulders. "Oh well, perhaps I'll catch him for lunch?" The guard to her right shook his head and frowned. "Sorry, Lady Cross, but Lord Rowan said he wouldn't be back at all for a few days." "That's right, he said as much. I just thought he might come back to have lunch with me at least. He works so hard and is always so busy. Though this affords me an opportunity to finish the song I've been working on. As usual, I don't like to be disturbed when songwriting. Please ask anyone who visits to come back another time. It's possible you might not see me for much for the next few days, so don't be alarmed." Both men nodded and smiled in the affirmative. Entering the manor, Mariana's skin tingled. She was really doing this. She hurried up the stairs and into her room, opening the window and looking out at the street below her. Nature could not have grown a more perfect ladder, with its branches sturdy and spread evenly apart, all the way down to the base. A more perfect ladder climber. Well, there were certainly many of those. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the window frame and stepped out onto the slightly protruding wall below. The soft skin of her palms scratched and bled easily as she gripped the closest limb of the tree, stepping carefully in her heels. She'd chosen the shortest and chunkiest heel shoes in her closet, but she'd have preferred a man's shoe if she had them. Fortunately, she had a lifetime of experience with wearing these, and she could even run in them with ease. Climbing, on the other hand, her foot slipped and she hung high above the ground. Her grip was firm enough to hold her, but she lacked the arm strength to pull herself up. She'd have to drop onto the branch below and hopefully not tear her clothes off. Scaling down a tree didn't seem like it would be this hard, but here she was, hanging from a branch behind Road Manor, thankful no one was around to see. Dropping onto the branch below, she whispered a thank you to the tree. She'd remained completely clothed with only minor scratches and both heels still unbroken on her shoes. A feat worthy of celebration. Using the rear gate meant for the gardeners, she could make her way through the vast garden and into a back alley. The sun was well rising now, but she was only a short distance from the palace. She'd make it just as they were opening themselves to visitors. They stored the airships on the same mountain she'd sang, so that was more than likely where Bronson had gone. Hang on one sec. I need cat extraction. Doing voices is one of the hardest things. It's probably as bad as yelling. Yeah, Sonny's trying to jump up on stuff. Like, I cannot stop him. Like, he's literally, like, trying to, like, launch himself under my hand. What a weirdo. Anyway, I gotta find where I was. It would be hard to explain herself if she ran into him. She preferred not to be recognized by anyone, and as she walked through the street heading toward the palace, no one seemed to. The few people who had seen her in person had grown accustomed to seeing her with exciting hairstyles and puffy dresses. Compared to that, she looked normal. Too normal to recognize, in fact. And it felt good, even under the circumstances. When she reached the lobby of the palace, she sat on one of the many benches that ran along the circular courtyard overlooking a flower garden. Now, all she could do was wait. So that's what she did. Wait, and wait, and wait. Nearly an hour had passed, and she started having doubts. What if the man had sent someone else in his place? What if he had disguised himself? Not that it mattered. She'd spend the day here regardless, sitting there quietly, not being approached by anyone. She no longer felt frustrated by her powerlessness. At least, not in the way she once did. If the man never came, there'd be nothing she could do to stop Bronson. Arthurus, a city as vast as many kingdoms, had lost the backing of the powerful church from across the sea. Something it once relied on to dissuade aggression from bordering kingdoms who craved the land that would allow them to become the continent's premier trade hub. And now, with the rail system powered by wind, so much made sense. The previous king was happy ruling the most peaceful and technologically advanced kingdom, but for someone like Bronson, she almost didn't notice the man approaching deep in her own thoughts. He was walking with purpose, wearing a leather bag over his shoulder. It was him. She was certain of it. "I'd like an audience with the king, and I'm prepared to go through the necessary channels," he said, surprising the two guards posted at the entrance. "And that's not a simple thing to do, you know. Necessary channels or not, the king is far too busy to see just anyone who walks up to the palace doors, the guard said, offering a sympathetic smile. It's a matter of national security, the mystery man said. Please send someone to review the documents I brought. I think that should be enough to convince them to let me see the king. The two guards looked at one another, the smiles gone from their faces. One nodded to the other, who disappeared inside. Someone should be out to see you shortly. Mariana sneezed, catching his attention, and he appeared to recognize her. She gestured toward the gate and started walking in that direction, hoping he would get the message. Sorry, I just realized I left one of the most important letters with a colleague. I'll be back shortly. The guard sighed but didn't answer. Quickly catching up to her, he walked quietly by her side as they walked in the opposite direction of the palace. Aren't you? You are walking straight into a trap, you fool, Mariana said sternly. Hansel. Or Hansel the Fool, if you prefer. Though I may not be quite as stupid as you believe, nor as trusting as my partner. Good. That will make this easier. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? If we run into someone who recognizes me, it will complicate things. Hansel nodded. I suppose I have nothing to lose by taking you to my office. You already know my face and could track me down easily. This would mean your future husband doesn't know my face. I'll warn you in advance that I have many a failsafe in place regarding the information I've uncovered. I'm not the only one who has seen the letters, and news will spread quickly if something happens to me. Oh, and we're taking a left up here. My office is very close to the palace. I gathered, Mariana said coldly. You weren't winded, nor had your shoes collected much dust. You didn't step off the carriage, and those aren't clothes suited to riding. Hansel smiled, slowly nodding. You're quite observant. The Bubbly Blonde Act is a life insurance policy. You've fooled even Bronson Road. I'm more than a little impressed. It's not all an act. I much prefer singing to sneaking out of my room at daybreak. I'm not saying I trust you, but, for what it's worth, I'm glad you did. Hansel stopped in front of the door of an unmarked building. Services unadvertised told Mariana all she needed to know about the man. No advertising meant that he was good. Very good. Those expensive clothes and flawless manner. He was accustomed to working with nobles despite not being one himself. And they didn't mind, it seemed. They wouldn't normally associate with a commoner regardless of appearance, but made an exception for him. An investigator, and a good one. Do your friends know you're working for someone else? Hansel laughed. A brilliant deduction, but your first error, I'm afraid. Partial error. Normally you'd be dead on. Then it's personal. It's complicated, Hansel said as he pushed open the door, walking ahead of her. You're back already? A deep male voice asked, unfamiliar. He probably chickened out, came a female voice, familiar. I met someone and just had to introduce you to my friends, Hansel said in a casual tone. He was met with only silence, and what Mariana imagined were confused expressions. With this man's good looks and dapper appearance, surely it wouldn't surprise him if he turned up with a lady. How strange. Hansel motioned her to come in, and she obliged. Just as she suspected, it was the brown-haired girl she met the night before. Her face instantly turned a bright shade of red, and the giant bearded man beside her only laughed, as though he'd somehow foreseen this turn of events. What a strange trio. It's the end of chapter 9. We're now on chapter 10. Alright, so we got 6 more chapters to go in an epilogue. Chapter 10. Lulu nearly choked on her drink, frantically wiping at the small stream running down her chin. She hadn't expected Hansel back for hours, and worried about him coming back at all. She talked Blaine's ear off ever since he left, and he'd been a surprisingly good listener. There were a lot of things that she'd been expecting, a few things she thought were possible, and then there was this. Mariana Cross walking into this office. Hey, about last night, Mariana held up her hand. That can wait. We have more important things to talk about right now. Hansel nodded, shutting the door behind them. He paused briefly, then turned around and slid the lock shut. You must be the reason Bronson left the party early, Mariana said, looking to Blaine. Hansel disappeared into a closet and reappeared shortly after with the stool, putting it down behind Mariana. You could say that, Blaine said with some reluctance. Don't play games with me, Blaine Grave. I'm aware of who you are and of your somewhat outdated reputation as a serial duelist. and more recently, a meddler in the eternal affairs of kingdoms across the continent. Do you have no respect for the sovereignty of these kingdoms? Lulu and Hansel were in an involuntary race to see whose jaw could hit the floor first, and looked back and forth between them as though they were about to witness an epic duel between the giant man and comparatively tiny woman. No, I don't. At some point in my life, I would have told you it was an honorable idea. Now, my friends past and present mean infinitely more to me than the whims of some overfed, lazy, corrupt royal. I don't trust anyone with status that they were handed at birth any further than I can throw them. That goes for your ladyship, too, even though I can throw you pretty far. Just as Lulu and Hansel had raised their jaws, down they dropped again. This time Lulu thought she detected a hint of a smile on the edge of Mariana's lips. Hansel had already raised his hands, uneasy about the prospect of an escalating argument. Lulu, on the other hand, was thoroughly invested in this banter. She thought Mariana was timid and frail, and that Blaine wouldn't be so quick with his words. Being proven wrong had never been so entertaining. What business do you have with my future husband? It's clear to me you're looking for him. I suspected as much already when he left the party upon your arrival, despite no previous plans to do so. And now, here you are colluding with these two who stole from him. I expect you to be honest with me. If you lie, I will know it. Blaine ran his hand over his beard, pausing to give the woman's words the weight he'd felt they deserved. Yes, I believe you would. Fine, the truth. I suspect he's responsible for further destabilizing surrounding kingdoms and fueling wars. Wars I've seen cut short the lives of people I've known, and others have narrowly escaped the scars and pain they'll take to their graves. Even if none of that's true, he's attacked my friends, and I and Velmar personally. That is alone is enough for me to meet him and settle the score. Mariana tilted her head. You'd come all the way here, across 2 kingdoms, to a foreign land, stalking one of the most powerful wind mages in our kingdom, because he tried to hurt your friends? Blaine nodded, no hint of a smile on his face. Do you think it's a lie? Mariana clenched her fists, and for a moment it seemed she might take a step forward and punch Blaine. Instead, she took a deep breath and wiped away at her eyes. If only I were as blessed with a friend like you. Yet, you are still a fool. No normal man can kill a mage, and despite your muscle and whatever sword you have, you are no exception to that. Bronson could summon winds powerful enough to crush you every bit as easily as you could crush an insect beneath your boot. If this is your plan to assassinate him with a swordsman, then you are all fools. Hansel sighed, leaning against the wall, shaking his head as Mariana. You aren't a mage, but you risked your life to warn me about the trap I was walking into. Bronson would be more ruthless to you if you're caught than he would with Blaine. Yet here you are. Why? Mariana clenched her fists again, a fire in her eyes. It's bad enough to see it happen and do nothing. I'm to be his wife. I've been tasked not to do nothing, but to help him succeed, to support him. His pretty and dumb accessory to make him look good in public or smile at a visiting diplomat. My family made it very clear that I'm to make myself as useful to him as possible, satisfying every whim and desire. I understand how you feel, Lulu mumbled. Mariana spun, baring her teeth at Lulu. Do you? Do you really? Because I would give anything to be a free spirit like you. Dirt under your nails, your soft, natural hair, no makeup on your face, your choice to wear a man's clothes if it suits you. You most certainly do not understand how I feel. Lulu stood up, nearly sending her chair toppling over, and stepped toward Mariana. She grabbed her by the fabric on the shoulders of her dress, failing to keep her rage completely in check. You don't know me. Mariana didn't respond, clearly surprised she angered her to this degree. Lulu, she didn't. I know. I'm going upstairs for a while if anyone needs me. Lulu let go of her dress, stomping loudly as she headed up to the second floor. With each step, she had more time to think about what happened. She lost control. She was better than this. Or maybe she wasn't. So close to losing it, no one could have stopped her. She needed to breathe. Just breathe. She closed herself up in Hansel's bedroom and fell face first onto the bed. Only a few moments later, a knock came at the door, and Mariana let herself inside. Lulu sat up but had nothing to say. She resisted the impulse to tell her to leave. Mariana sat down on the bed beside her. I'm cold, aren't I? Mariana said, lowering her head. Yeah, you are, Lulu replied, then let out a big sigh. Want to hear a sob story? I love sob stories, Mariana said, almost sarcastically, but her inviting smile gave Lulu the confidence to continue. My dad was the most important person in the world to me. Unlike everyone else in our family, he only wanted me to be happy. He played with me, roughhousing outside and fighting with sticks, pretending they were swords. He talked to me about politics, too, and many other boy things I wasn't supposed to hear, but was hopelessly interested in. My mother didn't approve at first, but she was devoted to my father and supported him in everything. Despite how free-spirited he was focused and navigated the politics of court well. Everyone respected him, and almost everyone loved him. Mariana frowned, clutching her dress. Did I foreshadow the ending of the story too much? Anyway, he could tell something was amiss. Everyone acted the same at court, but secretly there were factions growing. Traitors are only traitors if they lose. That's what's most important to remember. My father uncovered, or well, I'm speculating from here on out. He told me to stay away from Bronson Road and not to talk to him if he came around. Then he must have discovered something even more of whatever it was he discovered. He had me sent away to Valencia and had me take on a new identity, as a boy. He thought it would be safe enough for me to return before I grew up, but, well, that never happened. He was in an accident and fell from an airship. My father, a famous wind mage, well known, not for his raw power, but his refinement of the art, falls from an airship and dies? It's so absurd that... Mariana finished her thought. That it can only be an explanation meant to serve as a trap, singling out those who point out the obvious absurdity and noting them as a potential enemy or obstacle. That certainly sounds like Bronson Road. Wait, are you... She paused, looking up at Lulu with wide eyes. Your father was Wilhelm Windrider. Yep, you guessed right, Lulu replied, nodding. Then you know all about Bronson being appointed to his position, and how old Wilhelm's supporters suddenly went missing or died under mysterious circumstances. And the mage who challenged Bronson to a duel out in the open and lost, Lulu added, feeling that one was important. I'm sorry for what I said, Mariana said, grabbing her hand. Lulu instinctively pulled away despite not wanting to, face turning red. Embarrassed, she cleared her throat loudly. I'd like to hear your story too, if you feel like sharing. Mariana froze, taking a moment before mumbling, Oh. You don't have to if you don't want to, Lulu said, even more embarrassed now that she's cried. No, that's not it. It's just you're the first person in my life to ask me something like that who wasn't trying to use it against me. Lulu nodded. I'm sorry too. You're right. There's probably a lot I don't understand. The Cross family is prominent, so I was considered a marriage tool very early on. Like most girls, they taught me to sing, but I excelled at it. Like most young girls, I enjoyed the attention. I liked how everyone wanted to hear me sing, and when my parents would parade me in front of the other families. When I got older, my body matured, more things about me were getting noticed. The perfect girl who's beautiful could sing and said nice things. I unknowingly made myself into a more and more valuable currency. The more desired I was, the more control my family wanted over my choices and who could speak to me. Eventually, this led me to Bronson Road. After talking to him, I had a bad feeling. I tried to talk to my family, but they went to him instead. They had already promised me to him, not unlike his other properties. He constantly tested me to see if I would make choices that would make him look bad. He put me in many fictitious situations. At first, I thought that might be what you were, just another of his underlings toying with me to see how I'd react. It's why I tested you the way I did. Wait, you were testing me? Lulu folded her arms and nodded, smiling. I'm impressed. You had me all embarrassed, but it was just to see how I'd react if I thought I had the upper hand and took advantage of you. You're not angry with me? Mariana asked, tilting her head. So how did you know I liked... Lulu asked, too embarrassed to finish the question. Mariana once again finished her thoughts. That you fancy girls? I'm not sure you realize, but you don't exactly hide it. If you do try, you do so poorly. Huh, Lulu mused, tapping her fingers on her chin. What about you, do you? That free spirit of yours might make you come on a little strong, Lulu. Lulu furrowed her brow, pausing again to process. That doesn't really answer my question. Oh, right. Yes, it does answer my question. Sorry if I came across as inappropriate. Believe it or not, I do sometimes respect people's boundaries. Mariana giggled, catching Lulu off guard. You remember how I said I could detect lies? Aw, that's mean, Lulu said, crossing her arms. Now that we've cleared the air between us, there's something urgent I need to talk to all of you about. Lulu stood up, holding her hand out to Mariana, who accepted it with a smile. Right this way, my lady, Lulu said, helping her to her feet. That's the end of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. Alright, Chapter 11. Mariana and Lulu emerged to find Blaine and Hansel chatting and laughing like nothing ever happened. Now that the two of you have made up, Mariana, would you mind telling us where Bronson is right now? Mariana sat on the stool she'd been sitting on before. She'd been dreading this part the most. I believe he's in Clifftown. Hansel crossed his arms. Were you sang your song and we heard it across the kingdom? Why would he be there? He wanted an airship to be prepared to depart for Arthurus. I don't know why. Only that it was important for him not to be here to catch you in person. I suspect the experiments I've been taking part in are related somehow. Just cut to the chase, Hansel said, waving his hand. It's clear that you've put a lot of thought into this. Be more confident in laying it all out. What do you think is happening? Mariana sighed, clutching her hands together in her lap. She didn't want to say it, but knew they were probably all thinking it. I think he is planning aggressive action with Arthurus. The surrounding countries are destabilized or recovering. They are all neutral or friendly with both Arthurus and Estonia. It wouldn't be wise for them to get involved. In 2 days, they'll be departing. Because the city no longer supported by the might of the church who captured it from the witches, Arthurus only has one terrifying weapon that keeps the ill-intentioned at bay. Their lone witch. High in the sky, the airship could hold many wind mages and attack different targets all over the city, and their mages could quickly fly back up and they'd be somewhere else in no time. Their soldiers wouldn't stand a chance against wind mages, and their witch can't be everywhere at once. Hansel nodded several times, as though he were analyzing a poker game and not a potential war between territories involving his own country. There are two problems with this. The witch was an upstart, barely discovering her powers. In history, I'd be afraid a trained witch could blow the airship right out of the sky, turning it and everything, and everyone on board to ash. Perhaps this one can by now. Perhaps she can't. Second thing is the evidence we collected that he knows we have. If we present these letters to a kingdom like Velmar, who has suffered because of Estonia's meddling, won't they join in the fight? If other kingdoms know Estonia has been up to this kind of sabotage, won't they fear controlling traditionally free territory used for transportation? And furthermore, controlling the method of transportation, expanding it across the continent, immediately requiring Estonia's wind mages to power useless hunks of metal without them? Blaine slapped his forehead, then stood to his feet. How about the third problem? Us. If we could stop that airship and put an end to Bronson, this whole thing will blow up in their faces. Problem solved. You're overthinking this. Not every problem is solved with the sword, Blaine, Hansel scolded. And yet, for some problems, it's the tool most needed. Someone should have dealt with Bronson directly a long time ago. Everyone was quiet. Lulu looked at Hansel, sensing he had something to say, and nodded. I'm not saying you're wrong, Blaine, but my older brother said those very words, and Bronson killed him in a duel soon after. I don't want to see that happen to you. Bronson isn't some coward hiding in the shadows because he's forced to. He only does things that way because I know he prefers it. And he's one of the strongest wind mages in the kingdom. And sure, wind mages may not be more powerful than other mages across the continent. You're just the man. No matter how strong of a man you might be, you're still just the man. I'm sorry about your brother, but we just don't have the luxury of another way where we could spend all this time planning. I've asked you to help me find Bronson and confirm my suspicions. You've done both, so the job is done. I'll leave tomorrow for Clifftown and settle things with him. Listen, Blaine. I know you just want to protect everyone else all by yourself and be the hero who saves everyone in the end. But everyone in this room has plenty of reason to go after Bronson. It isn't just you. Clifftown is only a few hours' ride by horse, and even less by rail. Give me some time to come up with a plan. Hopefully one that doesn't involve you rushing in and getting yourself killed for no reason. Blaine sighed, lowering himself back into his chair. Fine. But tomorrow at noon is as long as I'm willing to wait. Any longer and we risk missing our opportunity. Mariana spoke up. I'll learn what I can too. There must be other information around his manor that I can uncover, especially while he's away. Perhaps something hidden. If he comes back, I may catch him in another secret meeting. which is how I learned of the airship planning involving Arthurus and his intention to trap Hansel. What? You're going back there? Lulu said in complete disbelief. All of you may risk your lives to stop him, but not me? Please, I'm not a child. Lulu crossed her arms with an exaggerated effort, huffing loudly, like a child. Well, I don't like it. Mariana giggled and reached up and touched her own lips, as though giggling was a strange sensation she never felt before. I promise I'll be careful. Bronson has been unwittingly teaching me his tricks for years. I know him better than any of you. He's convinced I'm too stupid to be of any threat, and I'm happy to keep it that way. I'll let the brave trio handle him, and I'll offer any support I can. And for what it's worth, I believe in Blaine. He doesn't strike me as a man of any empty confidence. Hansel sighed again. No, of course he isn't, but please don't encourage him. Comments like that will go straight to his head. Blaine laughed, picking up his drink and finishing it. Good luck, Mariana, he said, holding up his empty mug. She stood, bowing to him, then to Hansel, and finally to Lulu. Please be careful, Lulu said, in a voice almost too quiet to hear. Mariana only smiled, bowing to her a second time before walking out the door. Heading back to the manor, Mariana could only feel encouraged. This was the first time she ever met people who could be herself around. It made her feel alive and appreciated. They didn't force her to sing for them or ask anything of her beyond what she'd offer. And Lulu? Even if she didn't feel the same, how nice was it to be admired in a way that someone who wasn't just trying to use her? In truth, she preferred the heroic type. A brave knight in shining armor who would pick her up in their arms and steal her away, defeating Bronson in battle, her heart as only their only prize. She giggled at the impossibility and absurdity in it. Even if they stopped Bronson, or even if he died, she'd only be married off to the next powerful man who made a good fit with her family. Nothing would ever change that, but for today at least she chose not to care. She was nearly skipping as she neared the rear of the manor, stopping to stare down the tree that had given her so much trouble earlier. She crossed her arms, nodding with determination. This time the struggle was only a brief one, as she found climbing up to be much easier than climbing down. Nothing torn from her body or shredded, and only minor scrapes and scratches to speak of. She spelled into her room, closing her window and flopping onto her bed with an enormous sigh. She hadn't even been gone all that long, but it would be a good idea to go down and speak to the guards. Perhaps offer them a snack and inform them of her progress with the song. As the thought struck her, Mariana sat up in her bed, opening the drawer, pulling out a piece of paper, and dipping her quill in the ink. She began writing furiously, making motions with her hand that almost appeared aggressive. Less like writing emotion, and more like swordplay. Only pausing briefly to refresh her quill with ink, she kept this up for several minutes. Reading over the now crowded page, she nodded several times, satisfied with the sudden urge of creativity. A song about a bird who was too small and teased for it by the other birds. When all the birds are captured and put in the cages, she is able to slip between the bars and be free. Well, perhaps not the best song to sing for others, but a passable poem if nothing else. She slid the paper back into the desk drawer and closed it. As she walked to the door, she thought she noticed something in the dark corner of the room, but too much sunlight was coming in through the window, and the contrast made it impossible to see. She let go of the door handle, taking a step toward the corner. She gasped, stumbling and falling onto the floor behind her. Are you really that shocked to see your own betrothed, Mariana? You behave as though you've seen a ghost. Or is it that you miss me so much after only a day apart? Mariana slowly rose to her feet, gathering herself, her mind racing. You startled me. I just didn't expect to see you in the corner of my room, or at all today. I'd hoped to sneak out and see you today at the palace, and I was just so incredibly bored here by myself. You didn't seem to feel well last night, so I wanted to cheer you up. Bronson laughed, breaking his normally stoic expression. He looked at her, his smile wide before breaking out into laughter again. My, had I known you had such a fine silver tongue, I would have made use for you in so many other ways. The way you lied to me so effortlessly, and so skillfully, I quite enjoy it. Mariana held her ground on the slight chance that this was another one of his tricks, or tests. I'm hurt you'd say such a thing to me. Who has been putting these ideas into your head? I'd like to see them try to slander me to my face. Bring them in front of us and see if they still tell these stories as truth. Bronson smiled and clapped his hands together. Very well. Carrie! He shouted toward the door. And it opened. Carrie stepped inside. I'm sure you heard Lady Cross. Go on. Say it all in front of her like she demanded. Carrie bowed but wouldn't meet Mariana's eyes. I followed her as you requested. I saw her Look me in the eye when you say it, Mariana demanded. When their eyes met, Mariana saw the tears that streaked her face, and the fight suddenly left her. Who knew what sort of threats Bronson made? Who knew what methods he might have used to force her? Humiliating her would serve no purpose. If she'd been followed, she already knew everything. You already know everything, Mariana interrupted. I'm so sorry I couldn't be more useful to you in the dumb and beautiful way you preferred. She didn't even attempt to hide the sarcasm. Bronson stood to his feet, walking toward her. She flinched as he held out his hands, shutting her eyes tightly. He let his hands fall gently onto her shoulders. When she opened her eyes, he was smiling. That's where you're wrong. You're about to be more useful to me than you've ever been before. Chapter 12. So she'd been caught. Our little songbird's been caught. Alright, let's continue. Chapter 12, the next day. Could you stop pacing around like that? Hansel pleaded. It was about this time that she came by yesterday, remember? Lulu snapped. Blaine sat quietly, inspecting all his equipment carefully, each arrow in its quiver, each inch of his short bow. He spent hours painstakingly sharpening and polishing his sword, barely looking up to toss in a word here and there. Why aren't you asking to stop him? Lulu asked, sticking out her tongue at Hansel. Because he's calm and he isn't walking over the place. Also, why are you wearing goggles around your neck? Shh, someone's coming, Lulu said, spotting a young woman approaching her through the window. But I don't think it's her. Relax, I do have other clients, you know. You're going to scare them away. Ignoring him, Lulu hastily flung open the door as the woman approached. Hello and welcome, Lulu said with a smile. Hello, my lady asked me to deliver this letter. Please read it, the young woman said, thrusting it into her hands. Lulu wasted no time in opening it and began reading. Huh. By the time she looked up, the woman was already far away. Clearly, she wasn't supposed to do anything more than deliver the letter and leave. She stepped back inside, closing the door behind her. She seemed nervous, Blaine said without looking up from his sword. She said she was delivering this letter on behalf of her lady, then rushed off. Well, go on, read it, Hansel said, waving his hands at her. Lulu took her time, reading over the full letter, shaking her head before looking up at her two companions. Blaine, sensing the distress, finally put down his sword and looked at Lulu. It says she can't make it because there are servants there today. She said she would like me to come alone. Well, not me specifically, it just says to come alone. I assume she means me. It says she was able to find more information about Clifftown operation that we need to know. Blaine and Hansel looked at one another, the discomfort clear in their silence. Hansel pondered for a moment before offering his opinion. Let me see it, he said, holding out his hand. Lulu handed it over and began silently pondering herself. This isn't Bronson's handwriting. I have a basis for comparison to his. However, we can't confirm it belongs to Mariana either. I'm going, Lulu said with an uncharacteristic bluntness. Are you stupid, Lulu? We already know enough about the Clifftown operation to act. We can learn the rest of what we need to know after we arrive. You can save your flirting for when we return. Before Lulu could respond, Blaine stood to his feet, securing his sword belt. I'm coming with you. Hansel threw his hands into the air so hard he nearly rose from a chair. Are the two of you lost siblings or just share the same death wish? I've never met two people so eager to die in all my life. I'll admit, there's a solid chance this is legitimate. She just wants to talk to one of us. But why even take the chance? If she's in danger, going there will probably only put her in more danger. Do either of you ever think things through? Blaine gave Hansel a hard pat on the shoulder. What's to think through? We either go there and enjoy a nice meal with a friendly face, or we take a shortcut to the same destination we originally planned. If it's a trap, that means Bronson already knows about us. Do you think he'll let us ride into Clifftown and board the airship unhindered now? The landscape has changed. The rules for the game have changed. Too much thinking is even worse than no thinking at all. Hansel looked at Blaine for a moment, resisting the urge to snap back. He drew in a deep breath and exhaled, lowering his head into his hands and rubbing his face. You're right, I just don't want both of you to end up like... We won't, Blaine said. You can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee anything other than my own intentions. Lulu took the letter from Hansel's lap and placed it on the desk. We'll be back soon, she said, ending the conversation. Hansel nodded, following them to the door and closing it behind them when they left. As they approached the manor, Lulu stated the obvious. You know, if Bronson is behind sending the letter, he had to know we'd come anyway, which means the trap is more for you than Hansel. Hansel is cautious. Anything that would draw him in would have to be worth the potential payoff or the world's greatest trick. Blaine nodded. I'm counting on it, in fact. I hope Bronson himself is there waiting for us. Me too. I know what you have up your sleeve. You're too confident to walk in here otherwise, Blaine said, flicking the goggles around her neck with his finger. Lulu looked up at the towering man. Whatever you say. Don't worry, your secret's safe with me, he said, winking and giving her a small push against her back. Glad to have you with me. Likewise, she said, pushing down her irritation at having been shoved by the man. Did he really know, like he claimed? The guards noticed them approaching and stiffened. Bronson's guards were trained to receive visitors, but they likely weren't privy to your shadier dealings. Lulu hoped, anyway. Greetings, my lady has been expecting you. However, we were told to expect only one guest. Blaine was the first to speak up. Sorry about that. The invitation wasn't clear on which one of us was invited, so we both came. The two guards looked at one another, unsure of what to say. Escort them both in, a familiar voice said from inside. The guards opened the doors, stepping inside and walking toward a table in the center of the large room. A staircase looped up on either side. From the door, they couldn't see anything out of sorts. Mariana was sitting on the table in obvious distress. Her hair was disheveled and her eyes were reddened from crying. Mariana! Lulu shouted, rushing forward. Stop! Blaine roared, but his warning came too late. A club came down, hitting Lulu on the head and sending her reeling. As she collapsed, another figure came from the side with a large sack he tried to put over her. Blaine grabbed her by the collar of her shirt, throwing her back through the door and kicking them closed behind him. Quick! Get that girl! One man yelled from the railing upstairs. More of them. The man with the club made a quick dash toward the door, but Blaine drew his sword and decapitated him before his first step could touch the floor. Oh, thank you for following, Taps! Anyone else want to go after the girl? You're making it too easy for me, Blaine said with a smile, resting his sword on his shoulder. Forget the girl. This man is our primary target, another man said, emerging from the opposite side. The two above are mages, Blaine! Run! Mariana screamed. Pieces of the railing exploded, sending chunks of wood in his direction. The guards who had been at the door dove for the sides of the room, not interested in the fight who was clearly beyond their pay. The man who had been holding the sack dropped it and was now reaching for his sword. Blaine pivoted toward that man, grabbing him and putting him between himself and the flying shards. The man choked, spitting blood as they pierced his body from head to toe, pieces of wood jutting from every part of him. Blaine reached for the man's sword that he had been trying to draw with his left hand, yanking it from the sheath and hurling it toward the one man above. It came close, but didn't quite make it to the mark. A quick but strained reaction from the mage stopped the sword just shy of his chest. With a burst of his power, he sent the sword back toward Blaine. With a motion that seemed bizarre and timed far too early to Mariana, Blade swung his sword in a wide arc. Just before impacting with Blaine, the sword suddenly changed directions, and with speed far beyond when Blaine had thrown it, and even beyond the speed it had been heading toward him. It was more akin to an arrow flying from a bow than a heavy sword. Before the other mage could react, the sword pierced his chest. He froze, looking down it with wide eyes in disbelief as his blood dripped from the handle. He fell and landed with a sickening thud on the floor below. Blaine looked up at the other mage, readying himself for the next attack. Instead, the mage channeled his magic toward Mariana, sending her through the air above, on a path to the second floor. Blaine, using most of what stamina he had left, redirected the magic, sending her flying across the floor and into the wall. Hard, but not hard enough to injure her. The mage cursed, quickly retreating into the room he'd been standing in front of. Blaine charged up the stairs, fighting against the surge of pain he only now felt. A large shard of wood was embedded in his leg, slowing him down. A crash came from inside the room. Was he trying to barricade himself inside? Mariana struggled to her feet, clutching her shoulder, still stunned from the fall. Blaine kicked open the door and a large hole in the wall stared back at him, and the wind mage nowhere to be seen. Blaine pivoted and leaped onto the stairs below, running as fast as he could toward the front door. He flung the doors open just in time to see the wind mage flying into the distance carrying an uncautious Lulu. Blaine roared in a rage, pulling up the wooden shard from his leg and flinging it onto the ground. He sat on the ground, burying his face in his hands. He'd saved one, only to lose another. Mariana came and sat beside him. I was useless. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you, Blaine, Mariana mumbled, staring into the distance with tears in her eyes. Not just one wind mage, but two. Anyone would be useless. Bronson has more direct support than we realized. We may as well be fighting against the entire kingdom. I learned a technique in Velmar I can use to deflect magic aimed at me or passing close by, but it's only useful against wind mages if I catch them by surprise. Bronson wasn't aware I know this technique, but he will be now. My chances of beating him in a duel just went down, drastically. They weren't good before, now. But now you're going anyway, aren't you? Mariana asked, wiping the tears out of her eyes. Aren't you? He replied. Now that he knows Lulu is a tool he can use to lure us in, he'll surely use her as bait. Mariana nodded, then gestured to the two guards who put down the swords and surrendered, both on their knees. Then let's not disappoint him. I just had an idea to get us aboard that ship. And that's the end of chapter 12. We're on chapter 13 now. Gotta make sure that I refresh my throat every few minutes and stuff and clear out the gunk. Alright, chapter 13. Hold on one second. Chapter 13. When 4 people poured into his office, 2 he never met before, 2 injured, and missing one other who was supposed to be there. Hansel had questions. Lots of questions. Who are these 2 and where is Lulu? Rupert, sir, one man said. Darius, sir, said the other. They were my guards, employed by Bronson, and couldn't bring themselves to attack us. They surrendered when the fight started, Mariana said. Where is... Hansel started, raising his voice to a shout. One of the wind mages who ambushed us took Lulu, Blaine said, wincing as Darius helped him into a chair. He ripped his pant leg more at the opening, inspecting the wound. Wait, one of the wind mages? There was more than one? Hansel asked, running to Blaine and grabbing him by the shoulders. Blaine killed one and the other retreated. He grabbed Lulu before escaping, Mariana said. I'm going to need a needle and thread. Blaine's wounds need treated. I'll do that myself, Hansel said, half growling the words. Tell me, how do I know that didn't turn out exactly the way you intended it to? Hansel took a step toward her before Blaine grabbed his arm. Enough. How is she supposed to prove something like that? I trust her. Is that enough? I can treat my own wound, and I'm going to Clifftown. Hansel laughed, turning back to Blaine. Bronson would be... Blaine slapped the desk beside him, and they could feel the vibration from it across the room. Everyone jumped, startled by the sudden burst of anger from a man who had been so calm. What would you have me do? Sit here? Let him hurt Lulu? Let him carry out his operation and do whatever he plans to do with Arthurus? Hansel hung his head, standing in silence along with everyone else. You're right, Blaine. I'm sorry. You're right. Just let me think of a way to get us in past the heightened security. Mariana raised her hand. I have a plan for that. Rupert and Darius here will help me pull it off. The 2 men looked at one another, hopelessly confused. This was clearly news to them. We'll do it, Darius said. We will? Rupert asked, spinning his head toward Darius. We both know what happens to those who fail Bronson Road. That mage is going to tell him we cowered in field while Blaine killed his friend. Don't worry, you're about to make it up to him, Mariana said, patting Darius on the shoulder. How so? Rupert asked, even quieter than before. By capturing Blaine and I after the cowardly mage ran away, of course. Everyone looked at Mariana, nodding along with her words. Hansel finally smiled. That's just crazy enough to work. Exiting the transport in Clifftown, Rupert gave Mariana a shove, nearly causing her to fall. They were really selling it, and they needed it to. Hansel made quick work of rigging the shackles to break open with some deliberate force from the rear, rather than needing a key. Blaine's sword was being held by Darius. His bow and arrows had to be left with Hansel, who insisted on taking them anyway. The passerby on the transport were certainly convinced, avoiding them like a plague. Hansel had the fortune of not having been spotted by Bronson or any of his lackeys. This also meant he had to travel separately from the others. This also meant he'd almost certainly miss any action that took place, at least at first. He posed as a traveling doctor, carrying as many medical supplies as he could, hoping against hope that he wouldn't be sewing pieces of them back together. All he could really do was offer support before and after the boarding, but he wasn't about to stay behind. Once they'd made some distance between themselves and the travelers and began the long trek up the mountain, there was a brief window of privacy to speak. I know it's not really my place to ask, but how do you know they didn't take Lulu because he wants you to come? It's just a repeat of the last trap, and you're walking into it the same way, Darius said, directing his question to Blaine. Are the two of you really that dense? Darius tilted his head. Huh? Blaine sighed. Tell them the truth, Mariana. Mariana smiled. Well, this is more for the two of you than anything else. There's no way Blaine can sneak up aboard the airship, and he probably wants us to come. It's why he took Lulu. For us? I'm not sure I understand, Rupert added. Blaine cleared his throat. I'll make it simple. Doing it this way, the two of you don't look like you surrendered or failed. Bronson will kill you if he believes either of those outcomes were the case. Mariana knows that better than anyone. He may try to kill you anyway, but this is worth a shot to get you off the hook. Rupert and Darius looked at one another, slowing briefly. Seems it finally clicked. My lady, if we make it through this, I promise to serve you for life, Darius said, bowing slightly toward her as they walked. I regret we didn't help you when we had the chance. We're both cowards who don't deserve the mercy, Rupert mumbled from behind Mariana, as he led her gently ahead. There's no shame in that. Even I'm afraid of Bronson Road, Blaine said to everyone's dismay. You are? Mariana asked before considering what she just asked. Of course you are. Everyone's afraid of that man. At least you're brave enough to continue despite it. I should say that about you, Blaine said. You're no swordsman, nor are you a mage, but you're here anyway. You could have stayed behind. Lulu came for me. I barely know her, yet she came for me anyway. Even if I'm just a distraction, I can at least do something. I want to be brave and fierce-spirited, like she is. Blaine laughed, prompting Darius to poke him. I don't think they're going to buy the prisoner bit if you're laughing when we move over the crest of this hill. Mariana leaned forward, tilting her head toward Blaine. What exactly is so funny? Oh, nothing. It's just that you're sounding a bit taken by the girl is all. Mariana's mouth fell agape, and she gasped. Blaine Grave, that is a wholly inappropriate thing to say to a lady. Blaine fought back the almost overwhelming urge to laugh again, struggling for a moment to make his smile disappear. You're right. Apologies, my lady. I misjudged the situation. Mariana's face turned red. She glanced away. I did not say that. I just said your words were inappropriate. Far too blunt and coarse for polite conversation with a lady. Blaine nodded. I see. By the way, where's Hansel? Rupert asked, looking behind him, only now realizing he hadn't gone up with him. Securing horses. I think he means to follow if the airship makes it off the ground. Not that any of us would survive falling from the thing. Clever man, Rupert said, nodding, then pointing toward the level ground ahead of them. All right, time to put on your best abused prisoner face. The airship is up ahead. A few more moments of walking, and the sight that met them confused them all. A crowd had gathered, hundreds of people all clapping and cheering when they saw them approach. Bronson Road stood atop the ramp leading onto the airship, smiling with his Ardstrad ride. Welcome, renowned hero Blaine Grave. I hope everyone here doesn't mind our little prank. Seeing you being marched up here in this manner must have given everyone a fright. Blaine, Mariana, Rupert, and Darius all looked at one another, unsure how to react or what to say. A clever trick, old road, a man said in a top hat, said, raising his cane. I would have judged it genuine. Come now, do you really think I'd have my own betrothed arrested? You wounded me, my friend. Blaine, please say a few words. You said it was your dream to ride on one of these airships after all, even choosing to fly over your unhauled Arthurus. There's a friend of yours already on board who's been waiting patiently. You shouldn't keep them waiting. They're practically dying to get into the air. Blaine clenched his teeth, unlatching the shackles and taking his sword. Rupert helped Mariana out of hers, and she grabbed Blaine's arm just before he took a step forward. Her hand was trembling. Blaine looked at her, and she suddenly shook her head. This was all the confirmation Blaine needed. They'd walked into a trap far worse than any of them had expected, except for perhaps Hansel, who likely predicted something like this very scenario would await them. This is a situation a sword could cut them out of. This was such a wonderful surprise for all of us. You're so generous to offer a visitor such a privilege as riding one of our airships. You've left him speechless. Perhaps I could take Blaine's friends sightseeing, just as girls, and leave you boys to your trip? Bronson raised a brow as if to acknowledge Mariana's quick thinking. Nonsense, dear. This airship is so massive, and the surprise is just as much for you as it is for Blaine. You've put in so much work for our kingdom lately, advancing our wind studies, that I must insist you enjoy a holiday as well. Smiles and applause spread through the crowd. Mariana fought against the urge to shed tears. She was terrified. Every move they made had been anticipated. Bronson had created a way forward that allowed him to adapt to anything they'd done to gain the advantage. Worst of all, and most frightening, was the unknown. She couldn't fathom why he would do this. Shouldn't this have been a secret? Why was such a large crowd here who would undoubtedly spread the news far and wide? Nothing was accidental. A crowd like that was here to do just that, but why? Why did he have to gain from it? Mariana strained her mind, looking for any clue that might lead her to that answer, but she found nothing. No hint of what his true motive was. There was no way out of this now anyway. There was one hint that she and Blaine had both understood clearly. One false move, and Lulu would bear the brunt of his fury. Mariana smiled at Blaine, nodding to the crowd, and took a step forward, nodding to Rupert and Darius behind them. They had the opportunity to leave, and they'd be fools not to take it. As Blaine and Mariana marched toward the ship, Darius and Rupert followed close behind. At the top of the ramp, Bronson stepped between the four, cutting off Rupert and Darius from continuing. He looked at the two guards, pointing toward the bottom of the ramp. "I will deal with the two of you later." He quickly brought his attention back to Blaine and Mariana. "I hope you two are just as excited about this little trip as I am," Bronson said, raising the ramp with a gust of his wind magic, locking it into place. "Can't wait," Blaine said, finally standing face to face with the man he'd been pursuing all this time. Alright, that's the end of chapter 13. We had a few more chapters to go here. Alright. Chapter 14. Bronson smiled, then walked casually across the deck of the ship as it lifted off the ground. Normally, a crew of 2 or more wind mages held a ship aloft, and it took much more of their concentration. Bronson managed it alone and with seemingly little effort. "How are you doing this by yourself?" Mariana asked. "Oh, this?" he asked, laughing. "I'm a multi-stream mage. Seems I neglected to tell you that. So sorry." He turned to Blaine, rubbing his forehead. "Right, there aren't simpletons aboard. Basically, that means I can control multiple streams of wind. Unlike the other mages, a wind mage's power comes from manipulating natural forces outside themselves, but they usually only focus it on one place at a time. I can split this influence. Oh, and I'll have addressed a thought you're probably having, as the truth is I know full well you are no simpleton. Your sword technique of redirecting our magical stream, no matter how impressive, can't win against me. My mages tested that little theory of mine and confirmed you can only affect one stream at a time, and with great effort." "Where's Lulu?" Mariana asked. "No one was speaking to you, dear. Go and take in the sights while Blaine and I continue our—" "Where is she?" Mariana repeated, shouting this time. Bronson sighed. "And you had so much class not so long ago. Was it really all an act all this time? Your friend is right here. She got a little feisty with boarding, so we offered her a special accommodations." He lifted a large cloth cover from what had only appeared to be a large barrel, revealing a steel cage attached to a wheel with a very large and long chain. Lulu's hands were bound to each side of the cage, and her mouth was gagged. She struggled against the bindings. "Lulu!" Mariana shouted, taking a step forward. Bronson held up his finger toward Lulu, stopping Mariana with the threat. "My, you really have become rude suddenly. Perhaps this common girl has inspired rebellious thoughts in you. As you can see, she's graciously volunteered to be the ship's new anchor. I won't be needing a real one for this trip. It's only one away." "One way?" Blaine asked, drawing his sword. "Sounds good to me. Let these girls go. Lowering them to the ground with another stream should be child's play for you. You're a smart man, but you simply lack any inquisitiveness. Do you not care why I say it's a one-way trip, or why there isn't a real anchor on board? Well, the anchor was only ever decorative anyway, but you know what I mean." "I want to know," Mariana said. "Please tell us." "Good girl. It's good to at least see a glimmer of those manners returning. It's only one way for all of you. I'll be returning to Estonia once we're done. Dropping an entire airship on the house of a sleeping witch to be considered a few things by all the kingdom on the continent. Well, let's just address the obvious first. Overkill. Though, I like overkill. I'm sure Blaine would agree. When you want someone dead and prefer not to deal with them coming back for revenge later, overkill is the best policy. But it would be a shameless act of war. Even Estonia would not get away with being so brazen, regardless of her diplomacy. But let's say a former disgraced captain of the guard would hijack the ship to seek justice for his own master. You evil bastard, Blaine mumbled. What? I didn't quite hear you. I've met many bastards in my lifetime. Never have I met one as evil as you. Say whatever makes your soon-to-be departing soul content, Blade. This was over the moment you boarded the ship. In fact, it was over the moment you pursued me here. I'm just thankful for your persistence. Without your dedication to corner me like this, I'd have spent years racking my brain to get away with such an act. You made it easy. With your sword technique, you guided me over the witch's home in the middle of the night, then knocked me unconscious, causing the ship to fall. I could only save myself at the last moment, but lost my ship and my dear wife. Poor me. I like the version of the story where I beat you within an inch of your life, and you lowered the ship like a good boy. Nuna made a gesture with her fingers, something only Mariana saw, and for a moment, she just stared. I have a request. Only one. None of this would have happened if it wasn't for my help, even if involuntarily, Mariana asked. Oh, what is your request? I want you to trade places with Lulu. It's obviously you originally meant it for me anyway. Bronson tilted his head. Like your poem? You really are a sad little girl, but you are right. I did want to have you in the cage, as was my original plan. Fine, I agree. Cut her loose, Blaine. With a wave of his hand, the cage door opened. Blaine was confused, but did as he was asked, cutting Lulu free and removing her gag. Mariana stepped inside the cage and shut the door, which Bronson promptly locked tight by manipulating the mechanisms with his magic. He walked to the center of the platform and removed his jacket, revealing 2 belts that crossed his chest holding 3 knives. A long, slender S-stock hung from his belt. Shall we begin? Bronson asked, unsheathing the knives and sending them orbiting around him. I thought you never shut your mouth so we could, Blaine said, throwing a scabbard to the floor, assuming his stance. Bronson set a dagger toward Blaine, with another trailing close behind, holding to the other 4. It seemed as if he intended to draw the fight out, test Blaine for as long as it amused him. Blaine used his deflection technique on the first, sending the dagger wildly into the side of the ship's rails, burying it deep. Bronson lost concentration for a moment, trying and failing to pull the dagger from the hardwood. Blaine seized the opportunity, catching the other dagger in the air, drawing his arm back and sending it hurtling toward Bronson as he dug his feet in and charged forward. Bronson stopped the blade just shy of his throat, with Blaine close behind, drawing his sword for a fatal strike. Bronson redirected the dagger into a wide arc, stabbing into Blaine's leg. In a blink of an eye, another dagger pierced his other leg. A burst of wind hit Blaine in the chest, sending him flying back to where he started, landing hard on his back. All the air expelled from his lungs, he could only cough, struggling to catch his breath. Honestly, are you even human? You fight as though you're a berserk, yet calculate many steps ahead. I could have used a man like you. What a waste it is to kill you. Wait. He looked over his shoulder, then back to Blaine, before looking over his shoulder again. He focused on the ship, making an adjustment to the direction. He smiled at Blaine. Sorry about that. We were a bit off course. You must have distracted me more than I thought. Apologies. It won't happen again. Round 2. Blaine sat up, grabbing both daggers and wrenching them from his legs, slamming them down onto the deck with all his might so they couldn't be recovered again. Now, he was down to 3, along with the sword. Blaine had 2 more wounds in his leg, and the previous one had reopened and bled heavily again. Thankfully, they'd all missed arteries. You can do it, Blaine! Get him! Lulu shouted. You heard the girl. Come get me, Bronson said, smirking. Blaine rose to his feet, far easier than Bronson had expected. He instinctively took a step back. Another charge, just as quick as the last, with 2 more daggers coming toward him. Blaine deflected one with the sword technique, but Bronson made sure it didn't get stuck somewhere like the others, immediately regaining control and sending it flying at Blaine from behind. Blaine ignored it, deflecting the other dagger with his sword's actual blade. Again, he'd closed the distance, bringing his blade down in a blinding strike. As it traveled, a dagger pierced Blaine's shoulder from behind. This didn't slow him down as the blade dropped closer to its target. Another dagger sank into the back of his wrist, causing his grip on the blade to loosen. Bronson shot a burst of wind onto the floor between them, sending both falling back. Bronson stood quicker, brushing off his pants, sending another burst of air that flung Blaine back to where he started once again. I have to say, that's the closest anyone's coming to killing me. I'm very impressed, but I think playtime... He looked over his shoulder again. What? How are you doing that? Tell me! Bronson turned the ship again. When he stopped concentrating, the ship slowly turned off course again. Foolish of you to think my sword technique would be limited to only manipulating attacks, Blaine said. You're lying! That doesn't make any sense! You're going to lose, Blaine said, struggling to his feet. You can do this, Blaine, Lulu shouted again. You can win! Finish him, Blaine, Mariana shouted, gripping the sides of her cage. Honestly, my own betrothed cheering on another man, you break my heart. Without warning, Bronson unscrewed the heavy chain from the block that had been securing it to the ship and hurled the cage overboard with a burst of wind. Mariana! Blaine yelled, running toward the chain, fully intending to attempt the impossible just as Bronson had planned. What are you waiting for, Blaine? That's a long chain, but it doesn't last forever. Save the poor girl. Lulu stepped between Blaine and the unwinding chain, smiled, and slipped on the goggles that had been around her neck. She turned to Bronson and waved. Blaine stopped in his tracks, turning toward Bronson again. You! It was you! Bronson roared, sending a dagger flying toward Lulu, which Blaine deflected. She grabbed the end of the chain and was yanked overboard. That's the end of chapter 14. Chapter 15, we're on the last chapter before the epilogue. How's everybody liking the story so far? You guys can, I mean, if you feel like talking, I know there's, like, I always have a lot of lurkers. You can let me know how you feel about the story or my narration. Because we're, reaching the last chapter or so. Best story ever written, 37 out of 10. Aw, you know what? My link got unpinned because of OBS, of the internet earlier. So let me just in case you all want to read it later on your own. Here is the link. Let me just, thank you for pinning it. It was immediate. Faster than me. But that is the listing for the book if you would like to read it. It's a pretty short novel, obviously, if I'm able to do it in, like, one sitting. Alright, so chapter 15. Mariana seemed to float in place, somewhere between the ship and the ground, and finally stopped screaming. Lulu appeared in front of her, floating there, but clearly struggling. Duck! She yelled, drawing back her arm, and cover your ears! Mariana obeyed, crouching to the bottom of the cage. The cage separated, as though it had previously been neatly cut into two clean halves. When the top half flew off, it immediately fell to the ground below. Lulu reached into the cage, grabbing Mariana by the hand and pulling her close, carrying her in her arms. She let go of the chain, sending the remains of the cage falling and crashing loudly into the trees below them. Lulu, you're... Mariana struggled to find the words. Lulu smiled, pulling her goggles around her neck again and slowly drifting the two of them toward an open meadow below. Mariana's cheeks were flushed as she was carried safely in this woman's arms. She looked impossibly heroic, smiling at her. She'd rescue her from certain death, and in such a grand fashion. When they touched the grass below, Lulu took a moment to catch her breath. Doing this had taken her more effort than it appeared. Bronson needed to do for more. Goodbye, Mariana, Lulu said as she rose off the ground. Mariana grabbed her coat, pulling her back down. Without a word, she pressed their lips together, leaving Lulu speechless and red-faced when Mariana took a step back. Lulu tried but failed to complete anything resembling a thought. I want to get to know you better, to learn more about you and get to know the real me like no one else has ever wanted to. But I can't do that if you're dead. I gave you that kiss, but in exchange, give me the promise that you won't die. Say it! Promise me! Mariana grabbed the collar of her coat and stared into her eyes. Lulu knew that she meant it. She needed to hear her say it. I promise, Lulu said, resting her hand on Mariana's cheek. See you soon. Mariana took a step back, wiping tears from her eyes, doing her best to believe in her. Lulu fought the urge to run away and bury her face in a bucket of cold water. Her skin tingled all over. She allowed herself to be manipulated again by this alluring songstress. Before, she had every intention of killing Bronson, even if she had to die. She hated him that much. Now, she really wanted to live. Her thinking had changed. She wanted to survive. To get to know this woman for who she truly was, just as she said. She wanted nothing more in the world. She still had to finish Bronson Road, but she had to live, too. She flew back to the deck of the ship, landing just in time to see Bronson and Blaine, both on their knees. Bronson was bleeding heavily from a deep wound on his side, but Blaine appeared to be unconscious. No new wounds. Bronson must have slammed him against the ship and knocked him out. A female wind mage. Now that's a rarity indeed, and more precious than piles of gold. Join me. I'll dispose of Blaine, but I'll spare Mariana as a token of my goodwill. You can be my wife instead. Think of the empire our children could build, the most powerful wind mages to ever live. We could... Shut up. I'd rather die 1,000 agonizing deaths than marry you. The ship rocked as it slammed against several tall trees, before slowly lowering, landing hard in an enormous field. This is better, wouldn't you say? Bronson asked. Decided to give up? Lulu said, producing a roaring wind that swirled around her. On the contrary, it's just that unfortunately, I'm going to have to get serious and free up more of my attention, Bronson shouted. Lulu lowered Blaine off the side and onto the grass below. Then she flung a concentrated blade of wind in Bronson's direction, forcing him to fall backward and deflect it upward with his own power. Recognize this technique? She walked toward him, waiting for him to answer. His laugh gave it away. Wilhelm Windrider, my predecessor, his daughter. So you are the missing Lady Windrider then? How fortuitous. It's like I get to kill him all over again. Lulu screamed, throwing a stream of wind toward him. He had nowhere to dodge this time. The dagger flying toward her forced her to redirect the concentrated magic. A stream of air sent the blade shattering in all directions, several pieces striking Bronson. Lulu continued to swirl air around her, creating a roaring wind that was almost deafening. The sun was in her eyes, but she held the position, and Bronson was happy to let her keep it, giving himself the advantage. He drew his sword, sending it spinning in a circle toward Lulu. Her blast knocked it off his mark, but it wasn't enough to break it. Bronson corrected the travel, and Lulu attempted to counter, but lost the opportunity when she had to deflect another incoming dagger from the other direction. You'd be fine against any other mage, but your power is quite a hindrance when you're forced to fight in multiple directions. Your father learned the same lesson with the same outcome. Bronson brought back the dagger and the sword to synchronize their timing, then launched them toward her. Lulu took a deep breath. I'm sorry, Mariana. I don't think I'll be able to keep that promise after all. Ignoring the incoming attack, she sent a burst of air forward just as the dagger pierced her shoulder. Bronson screamed out, clutching at his severed right arm. Losing his concentration, the sword that had been heading for Lulu lost altitude and landed harmlessly at her feet. She fell to her knees, gasping at the surge of pain. Bronson's scream sounded nearly inhuman, clutching at where his right arm had been. Blood dripped from the wound onto his severed arm, now lying on the deck below. He raised his left hand, bringing his sword back into the air. He held it above him, readying his last attack. Lulu's power would take too much concentration. She was spent. No way to defend herself. A tougher batter than I could have ever anticipated. But the victory is mine, Bronson screamed. She closed her eyes, ready to accept what was to come. She waited. The sound of a sword falling to the ground startled her into opening her eyes again. When she looked up, she saw Bronson standing and staring ahead, an arrow through his neck. He raised his hand again, attempting to lift the sword, blood dripping from his lips. Another arrow pierced his chest, and his arm lowered to his side. He smiled at Lulu, that managed a weak laugh before falling off the side of the ship and onto the ground below. She'd seen the horses approaching and did her best to focus on making enough noise with her magic so he couldn't hear them. Then she fought him facing the sun so he couldn't see them approaching from behind. A strategy that had ultimately paid off. She'd avenged her father. Her vision was blurry. She was exhausted. She breathed a sigh of relief, reaching up and pulling the dagger from her shoulder. After a moment's rest, she lowered herself from the ship. Hansel rushed over, catching her before she could stumble to the ground. My hero, she said, patting him on the shoulder. He laughed, shaking his head, helping her steady herself. He barely dodged out of the way before Mariana threw herself onto Lulu, hugging her so tightly with both arms, causing them both to collapse on the ground. Blaine held on to his bow, Ripper and Darius under each arm, keeping him steady. Nice shot, Blaine, Lulu said, giving him a thumbs up. Oh no, that wasn't me. Not with a wrist wound. You're lucky your friend Darius here has hunting experience and makes a quick study. Darius bowed his head slightly, smiling with pride. We did it, Mariana said, squeezing Lulu tighter. We did it, Lulu agreed. We did it. It's finally over. And now time for the epilogue. All right, that should do it, Hansel said, breaking off the last stitch. I nearly ran out of thread thanks to you. Blaine laughed, putting a hand on Hansel's shoulders. It was an honor, and I'll always consider you a great friend. None of this would have been possible without you. Without any of us, Hansel said, nodding to Lulu and Mariana chatting. Guess I won't be getting a partner after all. Ripper raised his hand. As it turns out, I'm looking for a new line of work. Hopefully one that comes with a new identity. Hansel scratched his chin. Yes, I think we could pull that off. Perhaps in Velmar. I'll be going to Valencia to see the matters there, Blaine said. Not Arthurus? But you're familiar with Arthurus already. And Lulu spent time in Valencia. Wouldn't it be better if... Blaine shook his head. I read the letters you confiscated from Bronson. I don't think you understand the depth of their meaning regarding Valencia's situation. Hansel considered this, looking down at his feet, deep in thought before the realization finally hit him. You don't mean... I'll be going to Valencia, Blaine repeated. If I'm right, there's someone there who needs my protection. No one is better for that than you, Blaine. There is no talking you out of it, so I can only wish you the best. Girls! Blaine shouted, prompting Lulu and Mariana to walk over. I need you two to do me a favor and travel to Arthurus. It's less than a day's journey from here by horseback. I've written a letter for you. Give it to the guards at the gate and they'll know what to do. Bronson had tried manipulating the mayor there, but I firmly believe he is a good man. When he realized the true cost of Bronson's help, he cut ties. They need to know what he was planning. Maybe consider an extended stay once that's done. You don't have to tell me twice, Lulu said. I need to leave Estonia for a while anyway. I'll return after everything's blown over to find Mariana. Mariana placed her hands on her hips. You most certainly will not. I'm going with you. It's not like I can explain what happened today in a way my family will accept. I'm in no better position than you are. We're stuck together, like it or not. I would offer my protection, but it turns out that probably isn't needed, Darius said, nodding at Lulu. Blaine stood and patted him on the back. You can escort them there, at least. I've already written a letter recommending you to a friend of mine. If you wouldn't mind offering your sword to the city guard, that is. With your recommendation, I'd be proud to, and I swear that I'll make it sure they'll make it safely. Blaine nodded. They will find this wreckage within a day. I wish we could have a big farewell party, but I'm afraid this is where we say our goodbyes. No one liked the idea of parting so suddenly, but they were all in agreement. Everyone said their tearful goodbyes, hugged, and shook hands, and wished one another good luck. Lulu and Hansel shared a long hug before they could finally pry away from one another. As Lulu and Mariana began slowly riding away, Blaine grabbed Darius by the arm and leaned in to whisper in his ear. Make sure you ride a ways behind those two. They have a lot to talk about. Darius looked confused for a moment, looking from them to Blaine several times before it finally clicked. Ah, understood. Good man, Blaine said, mounting his own horse. Without further delay, he spurred his horse on, leaving Hansel and Rupert riding their own horses. Why do you suppose Darius is riding so far behind us? Mariana asked as they continued on the road to Arthurus. I suspect that's Blaine's doing. I saw him whisper to him as he departed, Lulu said, rolling her eyes. I'm already finding that I like you very much, Lulu, Mariana said, tightening her grip around Lulu's waist. Lulu blushed, taking in a deep breath before coughing. Oh, well, Mariana leaned forward, resting her head on Lulu's shoulders. I'll dream of your rescue for the rest of my life, I think. I've never seen anything more heroic. Oh, ha. Lulu tried to think of something clever to say, failing miserably. Ha! They welcome relationships between two women in Arthurus, didn't you know? Lulu swallowed hard, cursing her sweating hands, slipping on the horse's reins. Would you, she tried before taking a deep breath again. Yes, what I want, Mariana asked, stretching herself forward and rising from the saddle so she could look at Lulu's face. Would you like to try that kind of relationship? You know, with me? Lulu finally forced herself to say through a shaky voice. Mariana kissed her on the cheek, causing Lulu to squeak like a mouse from the surprise. I think I would like that very much, Mariana said, relaxing back into the saddle behind Lulu and hugging her close. Your father would be so proud of the woman you've become. Lulu sighed, nearly overwhelmed by the heat that surged through her body. She felt closer to passing out now than she did from the fight earlier. She was glad that Mariana couldn't see the tears that streamed down her face. I could get used to this, she thought. I'm going to get used to this, she corrected, overwhelmed with a sense of excitement for the happier days to come. The end. Ta-da! The next book is called, A Kiss of Blood and Blades. As you can probably guess, we are venturing to Valencia. To a new land, which will be next month at the end of August. The last Saturday of the month is when I do my narrating streams. Next Saturday, we will continue with our Summerween programming. You know what I mean? We'll play something different. I'm not sure what we'll play, but we'll play something different. And we got a couple more weeks of Summerween. Yay, applause. Well, actually a few more weeks. And then, hold on, I gotta sneeze. Oh, sorry about that. Anyway, tomorrow we're gonna be finishing, or not finishing, but we're gonna be working on the panel that I started. I don't know if it was last week. Was it last week that we started it? Good question. I don't think we finished it. Oh, I guess maybe we did. Well, I guess we'll be starting on a new one then. No, wait. Maybe I just didn't post the other one. Well, that would be weird, but what? Oh, I started on the socials. That's what I did. But I don't see it on here. I must not have posted it. Or something. I don't know. But anyway, we're going to be working on our socials panel with me holding a cute little cell phone and everything. It's going to be super cute, just like our other ones. And then Monday, I'll be playing Final Fantasy 3 some more. I'm not sure how far I am away from finishing it. And then Wednesday, of course, is Honkai Star Rail with the new patch. New characters. I don't think I want the 5-star that's coming out this first round, but she's awfully cute. Awfully adorable, so I can't wait. Let's see. Oh. Well, let's pick someone new to write. It looks like our friend, Red-Eyed Armor is on, and I haven't seen them on in a really long time. So we're gonna write them. As soon as I can type it out appropriately. So, Mr. Brogeth, if you would please get a raid message. Oh, Red-Eyed Armor has a follower-only or subscriber-only chat, so keep that in mind. But she is playing Kingdom Hearts Final Mix. So we will raid them for this evening. And I thank you all for joining me tonight. I hope you guys we could see each other tomorrow. Good night, everybody.